Thad Segmiller and Councilman Garth Nyson will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Heavenly Father, we're thankful for this evening and for the opportunity to meet as citizens of Washington City and to consider the businesses of the city tonight that are presented on our agenda. We ask that thou will be with us and bless us as we consider the various things and the various business items. Help us to consider them with an open mind and to be able to make decisions that are in the best interest of this community. Tonight we give thee thanks for the many rights and responsibilities which we enjoy, especially those opportunities to participate in our government, to be able to have open meetings where we can share our opinions and can be heard. Thank thee for the freedom we enjoy, and especially recognize and give thanks for the many people who have given their lives to secure that freedom for us. We thank thee for the beautiful weather we enjoy here in this community and for the wonderful friends and neighbors. Ask that thou would watch over us tonight as we consider the business of the city, and we say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Please stand and join in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you, gentlemen. Move on to item one of the agenda tonight is the approval of our agenda. Have you all had a chance to review it? I'll entertain a motion for an approval.
Here, I'll make the motion that we approve our agenda. Looks like 15 items.
Thank you.
Second the motion, Mayor.
I have a motion and a second.
Correct.
Second way.
Nice.
Thank you, gentlemen. Item two, announcements. I have one announcement. On the 25th of December, I think y'all know what it is. I just want to wish y'all Merry Christmas and hope that 2016 is a wildly successful year for all of you in whatever you endeavor to do. So thank you for coming tonight. And again, I hope you have a wonderful Christmas. Other announcement?
May I add one thing to that? Just a thanks and appreciation for those members of our community and staff of the city that helped with our Christmas in Dixie last week. It was a great evening, and certainly appreciate those members who helped make that happen.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Anything else? Okay, item three, declaration of extensions and conflict. Anything to declare at this time? All right, if not, we'll move on to item four, our consent agenda. Excuse me. To approve the minutes of the city council meeting 11/10/15 and 12/8/15. Consideration to approve the board audit report for November. And consideration to approve a special event permit for the annual New Year's Eve family event at the Washington City Community Center. Does that need to be separate? Okay. All right. Any questions or comments on any of those three items?
Just asking, Council, did you get your questions answered off the board? Well, if there's no discussion, I'll go ahead and move that we approve the consent agenda, which consisted of minutes of 11/10/15 and 12/8/15 city council meetings, our board audit report for November, and a special event, the community center, which is our New Year's Eve event, including the fireworks.
Thank you. Have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you.
Rice and I.
Sherman, aye. Staley, aye. Segmiller, aye.
Turek, aye.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. Those are approved. Item 5, financial reports, presentation of the 2013-2014 fiscal year audit. Hinton Burdick Hall and Spilker, PLLC. Mike, are you taking this? Good to see you again.
You too. Honorable Mayor, City Council. Pleasure for me to be here tonight. There's a lot of changes with the financial statement for the year ended June 30, 2015. That's what we'll be covering tonight. Appreciate the opportunity to be here and take just a few minutes to review this. I want to briefly thank the city's staff for all of their efforts, and we appreciate the opportunity to work with them. And this report is indicative of their efforts this last year. There's been significant increases, reductions in the findings and recommendations. We've had a lot of good work's gone into this. Also, with all of the new SB 6 accounting, this is pretty significant that presenting your report tonight. A lot of our local governments are still fighting the battle to get this report done with all those changes and so forth. So that's another feather in the cap for the city tonight that we're here this early in the year. Let's see where to begin. We maybe just to describe the audit briefly. For Utah state law, we conduct a financial audit of the city, which means that we review the financial statements themselves, the footnotes, the presentations, and so forth, and the underlying numbers. And we test those numbers and audit those figures and so forth. And we've issued our opinion on that, which is found on page 1, 2, and 3 of the report. But basically that states that the results of our audits indicate that the financial statements are fairly presented in all material respects in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. A mouthful. Basically a clean opinion. Also, again, in accordance with state law, with the governmental audit, we're also required to look at the city's internal controls and compliance with laws and regulations. And we've issued our report in relation to those audit procedures. And again, there are no material instances of non-compliance and no reportable conditions for your financial controls. So that's also pretty significant. Well, very significant. You know, we audit probably close to 70 local governments each year, and there's only a handful that come out with a clean opinion like that with, you know, across the board. So very significant to note that this year. Okay, with that, let me maybe start out briefly with this thing we call GASB, Governmental Accounting Standards Board Statement number 68. The city record a liability on their books, and Washington, that translates to half the long-term debt of the city went up just from last year to this year by that 2.5 million.
When we participate in the Utah pension plan, why are we recording? Isn't that through the state pension?
Yeah, that's for the state, and the 2.5 million is the city's proportionate share of the state's entire liability with that plan. Okay. And so that's else's contribution.
So is that a liability that in theory would ever be realized, or do we continue to make our pension that they receive through?
It's kind of a moving target. It's not as if the city all of a sudden has to make that payment. There's no changes in the required contributions to the pension plan. You're basically, this liability has been there, you know, since you began participating in the plan. It's just that the accounting standards now require you to put it on your books. So no change in the contributions that are required going forward. It's kind of like, you know, if you bought a house and you have a mortgage in the past, the way the accounting standards reported it was you would record your current year mortgage payment, but not the entire mortgage. And so you're still making the same payment every year, but you've always had that liability.
So is this liability an exercise to try and quantify how much the city will pay over all of the payroll periods until someone retires?
Yeah, it's
Is that
kind of
what it's
like,
trying to quantify?
it's kind of like if the pension plan shut down right now and dissolved, then that would be the city's share of the liability. But it's designed, and if you read in the footnotes, it says that based on this 7.5% interest rate, which they used, they anticipate that over the course, that there will be sufficient funds to cover the liability. So,
This note was driven
Yeah.
by the pension crisis across the country, where some states had a small percentage of coverage compared to other states. Utah actually was a state that was in pretty good shape, but still there's liability because they don't have 100% all the time. And that is the portion, I believe, correct, that has to show up in whatever the members of the pool responsibility is.
yeah.
So I take my chances to ask the governmental accounting questions when the accountant's here, and I appreciate your answers. So just to understand, we're required by state statute to participate in this Utah State Pension Plan for our full-time employees. If that were to become illiquid, are you saying that the city would have some obligation because of the illiquidity?
There's that, well, there's all of that, depending on what the courts and everything else decide with respect to that. What the Governmental Accounting Board, and again, Mike stopped me, and I'll just kind of talk to you from a policy standpoint, and Mike can correct me. But basically what they wanted to say is we wanted to be more transparent than it ever has been, and on the books of the parties who are a part of this program, that there is existing liability, and so the citizens and others can recognize that there's a liability associated with that. We have some states that have coverage as low as the upper 30s, and they're the ones that have run into problems. So I suppose ultimately if the whole world kind of melted down and it become kind of defunct, then yes, there is, and the court said you have to still honor those, then they could come back and say, but we've always recognized that there's a liability associated with that. We now just have to show it on our books.
Exactly, and you shouldn't see any change in the city's bond rating. As an example, like he's pointing out, those people that evaluate the financial statements have always known that liability is there. And if we look really quick on page 51 of the financial statement, this kind of illustrates how this is kind of it's an estimate, and it's also a moving target. The state retirement system based the estimate of the liability on a 7.5% discount rate. If you look at the very bottom of page 51, you see that that's the city's share of the liability that was put on the book, 2.4 million. So if they were to use a 1% decrease in that discount rate, that liability would go up to 6.2 million. But if they increase the rate, the city actually has an asset of 722,000. So it's kind of a moving target, and it's just as you continue to add people in your employment and retirement, it will ebb and flow. So.
Remember, each year you guys, part of the budget approved new rates by URS. Part of that is then adjusting to make sure that they stay.
Okay, any other questions on GASB 68?
I've been worried about this for months, and so.
Okay, let's just move on to the graphs real quick. And this first chart here shows the general fund balance sheet, and all I'm going to say about this is you see some significant changes there from previous years to 2015. That was because the city combined the recreation center fund and or community center fund and the golf fund into the general fund. So we had lots of changes there. Also reflected on the next page. And we see that, significant swings there in your cash and due from other funds. So combination. Also on page 3, reflect that, there's another change there. We look at from 2000 to 2000, or 2011 to 2014, it's fairly consistent growth there in the funds, but from 14 to 15, there's about a $3 million, $2.5 million increase. And again, that's because the community center revenues and the golf course revenues and related expenses were combined with the general fund. So over the last 5 years, about a 50% increase in revenues and expenses. But again, that's kind of tweaked for those two. So next slide. Looks like we lost it up there, but hopefully at page 4, if you're following along, we see there again, there's some pretty significant changes between the general fund expenses for between fiscal year 15 and 14. The parks, golf, cemetery, and public property went from 1.118 to 2.456. And again, that's because of the combination of the golf center or the golf fund. And then culture and recreation went from 0 to 2.2 million. And that's the community center that was previously reported as a special revenue fund, and then it was pulled into the general fund. So. All right, next slide, page 5, sales tax revenue. See significant increases there, 10 through 15. And next page, property tax revenue, again, increases there. And we'll look at the percentages. On page 7, you see sales tax revenues increased by 9.96% and property tax increased by 5.91%. So thank goodness those old days of the recession and reducing taxes are behind us.
Those percentages are based off of what starting point?
Well,
5.91% on property tax from what?
That's the year. So from 14 to 15, it was 5.91% increase.
How come the line goes down then?
Merely because the prior year you had a bigger percentage increase, a larger percentage increase. If you go back to the revenue, it does go up. So that's property tax you're looking at. If you look at
Okay,
page 6, it's,
so this line is tracking a percentage. Okay.
yeah,
Okay, that's what I missed.
probably would be better to do that as a bar chart next year, Dave.
Yeah, it makes it look like it's gone down.
All right. So good trends there. That brings us to the water fund. If we note here from 2011 through 14, the water fund these are operating revenues and expenses. So it doesn't consider any impact fees or interest revenue, any of those non-operating type accounts. So you can see that for the past 4 years there, it was pretty much break even. And then we had some rate increases, and all of a sudden we have an operating margin there in the water fund, which is necessary to cover depreciation on capital assets and so forth. So that's really critical that finally after those 4 years has been improved there. As you can see on the next page, on page 9, capital needs can suck up a lot of the city's resources pretty quickly. So you see from 14 to 15 that we dropped from 7.1 million to 5.3 million. That's mainly because of significant capital improvements during that year. So it's important that we have those margins that we were looking at on the previous page. When we look at the electric fund, we'll talk about that again, that concept. So the sewer fund on page 10 looks pretty good. We've got some good margins there consistently over the last 5 years. That's what we want to see. Then we look at page 11 in the sewer fund. We have a decrease in the cash by about $1 million. That's positive note for the year, the city was able to pay off early the 1999 bond. That was, I believe, about 200, close to 200,000 a year. Maybe somebody knows that. You can, so that will be 200,000 a year savings. I think it was going to pay off in about the year 2021. So, okay, page 12. As we mentioned, with operating revenues and expenses, we should see positive margins in an enterprise fund so that we can provide for capital outlay and depreciation. And we can see that 2 out of the last 4 years we had operating losses, and 2 years we had operating margins. For 2015, there was a slight improvement over the loss that we had the prior year. And I understand that the city's considering, you know, rate increases. They've had a rate study, so that's important to note there, that again, like the water fund, that needs to be considered for future capital outlay.
Can I take you back to page 11 for just a minute on the
You
sewer
bet.
fund?
Uh-huh.
And Mike can probably help me out on this, but I'm just noticing that there's, you know, we follow the blue line, and that's the blue line is our total cash and investments. What's the unrestricted equity? Can you explain what that line is and the
That's-
difference between that?
Yeah, basically that's all of your assets minus all of your liabilities is that equity number. So take all your assets, subtract away all of your current liabilities and all of your long-term debt, your bonds and so forth. That's the equity in the fund.
Okay, so that's,
It's a paper number, I guess. I don't know a better way to explain that, but it's an accounting. Does that make sense? That anybody else have a question on that?
you know, I looked at it initially and was thinking that the blue line was the revenue on that. And I wondered why the margin is. And
Oh,
then I got looking at it a little closer. And, okay,
yeah.
that's not equity. So that's,
Yeah, the red line would include your cash, but also at the end of June 30, 15, it also includes, you know, if I have an accounts payable or if I have a bond payable. And so
that's why we see those numbers true up in 2015 where we paid that bond off.
yeah, that's why that comes back closer together. Okay. Any other comments on page 12, the electric fund? Okay, page 13, cash investments. Again, the equity in the cash there is pretty close. And that's unrestricted equity. That's why those numbers are close. That excludes your capital assets and long-term debt. So any questions on that? All right, storm drain. Again, this is as opposed to electric fund, and like we talked about with the water fund, the storm drain fund does have, you know, positive operating margins like we want to see for the last 5 years there. Revenues, operating revenues exceeding operating expenses. So good trends there. Page 15 shows cash investments. So as we have those operating margins, you can see how the cash is built. And then as we put in improvements and so forth, and that cash balance is there. So it allows the city to basically forego borrowing and incurring that additional interest and going into debt for those capital improvements. I think, let's see, the last page, page 16, just real quick, that kind of highlights the debt service fund, the municipal building authority. You can see there's 6.3 million in that fund. That represents the city issued 2 bonds during fiscal year 15 that were still unspent at the end of the year for the police station and the park. So those 3 million bonds are sitting in that fund, will be expended this fiscal year 16, if that makes sense. So let's see. I think that's about everything. I hope that was,
Can I ask you a question on the booklet, the financial statement, under the financial highlights section, page 5? Just trying to get a better understanding in the first bullet point under financial highlights, where you state that 18,056,794 unrestricted net position may be used to meet the government's ongoing obligations to citizens and creditors. What does it mean, the unrestricted net position? Is
that means that, let's see, if you look at page 16, most of that is sitting in all of the city's utility funds. Right down there at the bottom, you see the there's 15,732,000. Most of that is sitting in the business type activity. So that's the equity, if you will. It's not necessarily cash, but it's the equity that's available that's not specifically earmarked to be spent on anything.
okay?
If
So
that makes sense.
it may not be cash right now, liquid cash, but that is funds that the city would have available at its discretion to do what it wants to do with.
Correct.
Okay. And if you look at the next page, page 6, or page 7 down there, it says, on the next page, it says that the unrestricted net position is 15,732,000. Why is the difference? On to the last paragraph on page 7.
It looks to me like the 18 million is the fiscal year, 18,056 is the FY14 number. You see it sitting there right next to the 50 million.
And I guess I should look at this then. So the first paragraph on the first page, we looked at the June 30, 2015 portion.
Yeah, that's not correct.
So that should have been 2014.
Well, it should have, the 18 million should have been 15,732,020.
So that's incorrect then on the
Correct.
first page.
Right.
So we really have the 15,732,000 that's available one way or another to the city to carry out the city's business. It's not designated, earmarked for any particular project.
Yeah, and like I said, in the governmental activities, if you look across that, you're actually upside down by 1,078,000. And then in the business type activities, you have 16.8 million.
So that leaves us at 15.
Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. Again, we appreciate the opportunity. I want to recognize Dave Witt, where he's the audit manager that oversees the audit for us. And you always have to have the most intelligent guy with the boots on the ground. So I'm just here to explain a few things. He's the guy who knows everything. So
Thank
give
you,
us a
Mike.
call if you have any questions.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you for your work on all this too. We truly appreciate it. Okay, we'll move on to our item 6, preliminary plat, a consideration to approve the preliminary plat for the Brio Phase 2, located at the corner of Brio Park and Rialto Boulevard. Applicant Jack Fisher Homes.
Thank you, Mayor. We'll give this a second, hopefully, to catch up. There we go. The applicant is requesting approval of the preliminary plat for the Brio Phase 2 subdivision as stated The applicant is wishing to develop 88 lots on an area covering 24.52 acres. These lots will consist of all residential use. The location at this particular project is zoned PCD, or the Planned Community Development, according to our zoning regulations. The surrounding zoning is open space to the north and west, single family residential 6,000 square foot, or the R16, open space and multifamily residential to the east, service commercial and multifamily residential and planned unit development to the south. There's a lot happening around this, in essence, is what that's telling you. The request meets the zoning regulation requirements and other city ordinances as it relates to this location. It does conform to the PCD approved plan. Staff's reviewed the request and recommends that the proposed subdivision be approved. The Planning Commission reviewed the request at their November 18th meeting. The Planning Commission unanimously recommended approval of the preliminary plat for Brio Phase 2 subdivision to the City Council. Of course, it's based on the findings and subject to the conditions. That would be for a preliminary plat and for the PCD. So with that, I'll be more than glad to answer any questions on this preliminary plat.
You're on the road cross section that's in the upper right-hand corner. Which road is that cross section? Which roads are those cross sections referring to?
Let me find out which one.
It looks like we maybe don't have the 66-foot collector on this plat. Or is that this
It would be,
boulevard one?
it would be, yeah, the, right down here along the bottom.
Is that the feeder off of Buena Vista?
Yes, it is. It ends up winding around and then kind of, it just follows all around almost the whole subdivision from south to north, but isn't a straight shot. That would be that particular.
Okay.
Now, we
And the
did talk
other-
to the developer during the stage, and they were just going to build that road out probably full at that time, just so it's not a partial. And they were fine with doing that. So
The other roads are the 50-foot residentials then that would
Yes.
have the lower cross section?
yes,
Okay.
it should be the only two that we're going to be probably dealing with on this.
So I noticed that all of the residentials have at least one sidewalk as depicted in the cross section.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, all their street cross sections will reflect what was approved in their PCD.
Mhm. On the Boulevard Road, what is that note? RIAL to Boulevard? Was that there's some letter missing there? Name of the road? Oh, so maybe there's, Rialto Boulevard?
Right.
I thought I saw space between L and T.
You know, on when you look at it on your iPad, it's the same to me. I thought they might have left the T off of the trail to the boulevard, but no, but then when I look up on the TV screen, it is, and the name of it is Rialto Boulevard on this particular case.
Okay.
I can see exactly what you're seeing when you look on your iPad.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Comments?
Can you just give me an idea, Drew, where this plat falls in relation to the community center that they're building right now?
It's
Is it-
it's northwest, if not due west, but just maybe northwest. I mean, it is west of it, of course, and it's right next to, of course, the golf course area and everything in that gorge on this. If you're looking at your TV screen on the top of it, that's basically the gorge area. So it's probably due west.
So it's more west than it is
West,
north.
yeah, west, northwest.
Yes, because if we blow up in here, you can kind of see the community center is right where all that bubble work is, where it says Phase 1A. So it is due northwest. And its west boundary is up on the golf course, the two holes we have on area there would be the west boundary of phase 2.
Comment, Drew, I love seeing the proposed golf cart access from out of that. I think that'll be a great asset to the citizens in that community and also to our golf course. So I'm certainly glad to see that
We've
worked that
talked
out.
about that quite a bit, and Barry's been in conjunction with the engineer and the developer and really pushed to get that. And some, we're excited about that as well. So I'll pull that up and zoom in on it. That's that particular area that I'm talking about right there. On the park path.
I recall when this PCD was brought before us initially that we had a lot of discussion about sidewalks being on just one side of the street. In the conditions, in condition number 11, says that the street cross sections will need to be approved through the adoption of the project plan book and development agreement. Were those not already approved at the approval of the PCD?
They are. I think we're just referencing here that anything done has to conform to that. Maybe it got, might have misworded it, but that's the intent, was to be that it would be. It's already approved. We're just making sure that what they're designing here falls with what was approved by you folks. The time with the approved cross sections that were approved at that time as well. That's all. We're just referencing that to make sure they understand that's one of the conditions that you will meet. You know, what is on your PCD, and no changes will be accepted or variations.
Would it be better to change the wording on that, street cross sections, to comply with approved project plan book and development agreement?
Well, probably we could just say by the city council as per adopted development agreement and plan book. Maybe we can change that.
I don't want to nitpick it, but I just recall that being a big part of the discussion. And I remember we did approve that development agreement and we looked at the project plan, but so everything was pretty specific. So when a preliminary plan comes like this, or a preliminary plat, it really just conforms with what we've already seen.
Right. Yeah, we can strike that and reword that. Read the street cross sections with the adopted plan book and development agreement.
Has there been any concern about the additional traffic up in that area?
Probably not, because any additional traffic is only going to be on Buena Vista Boulevard. It's really not anywhere east. You know, even to the east on Main Street yet. They're not even over there yet. So it's all coming off of that new road right there, just east of the fire station. Or it actually, I guess they can end up going through Mill Creek Springs as well, but I haven't seen anything. There's only a handful of homes that have been built so far. But we designed Mill Creek Springs Drive that does come out of Mill Creek Springs with the intent of it being a bigger road. That's why if you drive up, it's a very wide road. On the west side of the fire station, that first road that you go up, it was made to be a car mover. It's a really big road. As of today, no, I guess the simple answer is no, because there's nobody there yet. It's just all the construction traffic of the guys building the homes and the roads that have been on there. So,
Well, and we also, they were required to improve Buena Vista with some deceleration lanes and such, even to access their boulevard. So
yeah, they haven't. They've even actually improved Main Street if you've been up, and it's been widened at that intersection as well. So we really haven't had any issues with traffic as of yet.
Mayor, if there's no other discussion, I'll go ahead and motion that we approve the preliminary plat for Brio Phase 2, located at approximately the corner of Brio Parkway and Rialto Boulevard, with changing condition number 11 to read, street cross sections shall comply with the adopted project plan book and development agreement.
Thank you.
I'll second the motion.
I have a motion and a second.
Ms. Nye?
Sherman, I.
Staley, aye. Segmiller, aye.
Turek, aye.
Thank you, gentlemen. That's approved. Move on to item 7, final plat. Item A, consideration to approve the final plat for Brio Phase 1B located approximately at the corner of Villa del Sol and Camino Corto. Applicant Jack Fisher Homes.
Mayor, as stated, this is a request for the Brio Phase 1B subdivision. The particular subdivision proposing 21 lots. And the area coverage is 6.492 acres. The zoning, of course, again, at this location is the PCD or Planned Community Development. The preliminary plat was approved by the council back on August 13th of 2014. Staff's reviewed the request proposal and the proposed final plat conforms to the approved preliminary plat. The Planning Commission reviewed this request at their November 18th meeting. Planning Commission unanimously recommended approval of the final plat for the Brio Phase 1B subdivision to the City Council and based on the findings and subject to the conditions. And there are a few more conditions, but this is just because it's related to the PCD and wanted to leave these on, didn't have a chance to get with Lester before. And so this will still cover everything that Phase 1A had with it. I want to make sure in case any of it crossed over to 1B that it will all be met as well. Not that we have a lot of issues. I just want to make sure it's covered on both 1A and B. So that's why there's a few more extra conditions on there. We'll just make sure that every T is crossed, I is dotted as it relates to those particular notes on the final plat. I'd answer any questions that the council might have on this final plat.
Any questions for Drew or the applicant?
If there are no questions, I'll make a motion that we approve the final plat for the Brio Phase 1B located approximately at the corner of Villa del Sol and Camino Corto.
Thank you. I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second.
Turek, aye.
Segmiller, aye.
Staley, aye.
Sherman, I.
Nice and I.
Thank you, gentlemen. That's approved. Item B, consideration to approve the final plat for the Vincent Lane Townhomes located approximately 500 West Vincent Lane. Applicant Troy Wall.
Thank you, Mayor. As stated, this is for the Vincent Lane Townhome project. Subdivision is proposing 9 lots and the area coverage is 0.59 acres. The zoning at this particular location is the multifamily residential R3. We refer to it in the zoning regulations. And the required conditional use permit was approved on February 18, 2015. Make note of that because anything in an R3 that's over 4 units on a lot has to get a CUP. The final plat does conform to that approved conditional use permit, and it does conform to the approved preliminary plat, which was done back on March 25th of 2015. Staff's reviewed the request for proposal and finds that the final plat conforms to the approved preliminary plat and the CUP. The Planning Commission reviewed the request at their December 2nd meeting last week, and the Planning Commission unanimously recommended approval of the final plat for the Vincent Lane Townhome subdivision to the City Council based on the findings subject to the conditions in your report, and the 5 conditions are standards for final plats. I'll be glad to answer any questions the council might have on the Vincent Lane Townhomes.
I recall that we discussed access to this, especially with the Aaron Kimball Foundation, just adjacent to it. Can you talk us a little bit as to how that worked out? Did it work out as well as you'd hoped, or is it a tough access in there? Or
I would probably answer yes to both those. It's a unique place if you've been back in there for all that's going on with mini storage, this particular townhome project and the Aaron Kimball project, that everything has to come in that way. So I would say that it's probably going to work out the best that it can under all the circumstances. I'm glad it's as wide as it is. And I think we're pretty lucky there with what we ended up with for all three of those different uses that'll be upon this road. So I think it'll all work out well. Is it the perfect scenario? No, but it's, I think, pretty good.
And the fire chief was comfortable with it.
Yes, he's
Fire
approved the
access.
construction drawings and all that at this point. Of course, we don't let a final plat come until construction drawings are approved. And so all that has been met. My understanding. So
Can you walk me through just the parking scenario that's here for these, this many units?
yes, they actually will be parking. There's double parking in front of these particular ones. And so that's, remember if I have, kind of see the outline when you zoom in on them. And they all have at least a minimum of 2 parking stalls, and they will be in the homes themselves.
Two parking stalls directly in front of the home.
Yeah, but is Brandy here? Brandy? Guess not surprising. I don't remember if these have lodges. I think that's why we might end up with 3 of them.
It would be a pretty tight garage because just looking
It'll
at
be
the
a
dimension,
single.
You're
It'll be a
23 by
small
40,
single
you'd be
garage.
860 feet on your footprint.
Yeah. And they are a 2-story unit. But I think they are a very small single car garage.
I know,
I don't think Councilman Turek would have let it get through without adequate parking. on the
I'm glad
preliminary
you said it.
plat.
I didn't dare want to say
So
that.
what do you remember,
I'll
Jeff?
take that rap.
and I missed the preliminary plat, so I've still got a few questions here. Vincent Lane, can you draw its easement through? It appears to conflict with unit number 9 there, so I'm trying to understand, is it, if you pull out a little bit, you'll see where Vincent Lane, there it is. Does it end at the midpoint of the project?
Not in this case, there was already an existing easement that continued onward, which was part of the Aaron Kimball that had to bring in the rest of it down there that's already been recorded. You're all familiar, I think, with the area. If you continue on, it actually used to be from my understanding, a road that was designated on the county records as the cities that went all the way through, but for some reason they looked at everything just in a 2-dimensional form and it went right through
Through the gorge?
Mill Creek,
Yeah.
and then popped back up on the other side, and everybody knew it was never going to go through there. So we ended up actually giving back at times, but we didn't give everything back as non-usable. We made sure there was, we made it smaller, but there was given, people on each side gave up easements all the way through.
So the Vincent Lane bends down on Darren Kimball. It doesn't, so that 9th unit, that unit number 9 is not in the way of the easement as
No.
it appears right there.
No, not at all.
Okay.
It's not. There's actually a little easement, maybe to the south of that. I think there's a little bit more than 25 feet on mini storage, foundation, and this particular unit. Everybody has their different portions that they gave up on those recorded easements.
I recall, Councilman, it's kind of a bend as you come into that kind of bends
The
down.
driveway.
Kind of, yeah, nooks back into the little corner there. You said it's kind of in the middle of everything.
Interesting corner that we've got.
It is, again, there's a lot going on right there, but it's the best that it could be under the circumstances. We did have them, just for the council's information, though, even though there's 9 units on here, they came in with a proposal for 10. Planning Commission and staff didn't feel comfortable with that. So we ended up, they finally went down and agreed to having 9 units, help with more room, especially right here in that front corner. And just not to have as many units in there. I went for 8, but the Planning Commission was fine with 10, so it was a good.
Any other questions or comments on this?
Mayor, I'll just state that it is surrounded by condominium projects and storage projects and a number of other things, and it appears to be a good usage of a lot that be good to have something going on there.
Right. It's been a big weed patch, and there was a project that was approved years ago. This same Vincent Lane Townhomes, it was approved with 10 units years ago, and again, because of it was right at the downturn of everything, the economy, and it never did come to fruition. So they were just kind of resurrecting that and bringing it back.
Mayor, if there's no other comments or questions, I will make the motion that the council approve the final plat for Vincent Lane Townhomes located at approximately 500 west on Vincent Lane.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you.
Rick, aye.
Segner, aye.
Staley, aye.
Chairman, I.
Nice night.
All right, that's approved. Move on to item C, consideration to approve the final plat for the homesteads at Stuckey Farms, Phase 1, located approximately 875 East, 4700 South, applicant Carl Larson.
Mayor, again, another final plat proposal. This particular subdivision is proposing 24 lots, and the area of coverage is 12.20 acres. Again, we're in a zoning district of PCD. This happens to be the Stuckey Farms Planned Community Development. The preliminary plat was approved back on May 27th earlier this year. Staff's reviewed the request proposal, finds that the final plat conforms to the approved preliminary plat and the PCD. And the Planning Commission reviewed the request at their December 2nd meeting last week. And the Planning Commission unanimously recommended approval for the final plat for the homesteads at Stuckey Farms Phase 1 to the City Council. And of course, based on the findings, subject to the standard conditions of 5 of those. And again, I'll be more than glad to answer any questions that the council might have on the homesteads. It's a little confusing as you look at it because it's kind of turned upside down versus north and south. So the bottom of the page is actually north. But as you're driving down the road, this is kind of what you would see on the right-hand side. So
I understand the common area along the roads there, but there's a triangular piece that's designated common area. No, is that more of a detention basin or?
I don't think that it is, to my recollection. I think it was just leftover remnant that they're going to turn into a little neighborhood landscaped, because they would label it a detention pond. I think it's just, again, it's a remnant piece. It'll just end up being landscaped.
You're on that same corner there near that triangular piece. It appears that the road and part of lot 24 across what I'm assuming is the property boundary. Is Groves LLC the owner on the other side? Are they part of the Stuckey Farm project?
No, they're not. I think I thought you were asking if it was part of.
Just want to know if they know that we're approving a plat that crosses that boundary line. And that's okay? Okay. Carl's shaking his head yes back there. You see what I'm referring to?
You're talking about in that corner right there?
Yeah, lot 24. I can understand the road crossing it because sometimes roads cross boundary lines and they get finished when the other piece gets developed. But sounds like it's part of the project. It's just.
But I almost think those are just off of section lines, if I remember right. That's what those lines are, section lines.
So that's not a boundary line?
No, the dotted lines like that are just sections that, everything was broke up into 640 acre sections as they went through. And that's just the crossing of either a full section line or a quarter section line or a half. I'm not sure. But that's all that line is. It's just a reference on a section for a meets and bounds. Invitation. So yes, the solid lines is the ones we're more concerned about on the plats. Those are the boundaries.
Well, the line it crosses is a dotted line. No.
Yeah, but I'm just saying that the boundary of the subdivision, that is the solid dark line. And that is just a section line that crosses over that, and that's okay.
Any other questions or comments on this project?
Mayor, seeing none, I'll go ahead and motion that we approve the final plat for the homesteads at Stuckey Farms Phase 1, located approximately at 875 East, 4700 South.
Second.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second.
Correct, guy?
Segment right.
Staley, aye.
Sherman, aye.
Ashton, aye.
All right, that's approved. Move on to item 8, public hearings and related ordinances. Item A, public hearing to consider potential projects for which funding may be applied under the Community Development Block Grant, the CDBG, for program year 2016. City Manager Roger Carter.
Yeah, Mayor, just before we open the public hearing, I need to just kind of inform everyone what the purpose of this public hearing would be and to meet the requirements associated with this. The CDBG program is a Community Development Block Grant program operated by HUD. And its primary purpose, of course, is to provide grant monies that would benefit primarily low to moderate income. We belong to a region down here called the Five County Association. And the state of Utah receives this grant funding and then disperses it to the regions. And then the regions, based upon a rating and ranking process, will then have it distributed to the municipalities or other eligible parties. We don't have the total for 2016 that what will be. Congress is a little slow in getting that decided upon, but last year, just so that there's an idea, about $740,000 was granted to the Five County Association of Governments that then dispersed. Disbursement is based upon projects that the city and eligible parties might request have to be put on a consolidated plan that we turn into the Five County Association every year. And they include such things as water sewer lines, fire stations are eligible, homeless shelters, food banks, infrastructure issues like that. Not all projects are eligible, of course, but some are. Also, private businesses sometimes are eligible depending on hiring of low income and other stress classes, I guess they consider them to be. The reason we're approaching this and considering this, and so we're stepping through one of two public hearings that will occur, is because we looked at this as a potential source of funds to assist at all with any of the curb gutter sidewalks, storm drain, anything in the downtown area. We don't know if we'll use it because, of course, some of the challenges that come associated with grants, especially federal grants, sometimes become more onerous, more difficult than they're worth. And so we are not committing to applying for the funds, but we're walking through the process so we meet the requirements to request them if we so want to. In times past, Washington City has typically not participated in the Community Development Block Grant Fund, in large part again for the ties and the conditions associated with it, but we've often been a sponsor. You all remember, I believe there's this council that helped sponsor the Aaron Kimball Foundation. That was a Community Development Block Grant funded project. And Washington City was the sponsor because they were not an eligible independent sponsor, and so we had to sponsor.
So to even be able to consider this as a source in the future, we need to hold this hearing tonight.
Yeah, and so what will happen
And-
is that the purpose of this hearing tonight,
And
and
what
we'll
is
have a second one, is to allow the public, if they have any projects they would like to be considered, they have that opportunity.
That was my next question. What's the public supposed to say?
That's it. So if they want to step, so could we consider for this or that or the other? And again, they don't necessarily recognize what will be eligible and what won't. And sometimes we don't. We have clarification, but it gives them an opportunity to do this. Like I said, we've anticipated possibly looking at it for some funding sources for the downtown. But that's the purpose for the first hearing. And the second hearing, should we choose to move forward, the second hearing will be to announce what we would decide upon and get public input. I think I've covered what we ought to, and so sometimes we have comments, sometimes we have no comment, but
Maybe I'll just add a little bit to that, Roger. I think it was you that suggested it as we were reviewing the downtown ideas, and we, probably about a year ago, we had a an open house showing kind of some of the ideas that maybe could help. That included sidewalk and curb and gutter in a lot of the older neighborhoods that haven't got it. It also included improved storm drain, especially in a number of places, instead of above ground storm drainage systems below ground. And the nice thing is if the CDBG made sense and if the strings weren't more onerous than the benefit, it could also help the city just cover some of the costs of those projects.
Well, that's our goal. Our goal would be to reduce the individual contribution by the citizens with respect to this. The challenge in all these projects are always the Davis-Bacon wage requirement. And so that would be a math figure for us. Depending on what we think we're eligible for, does a Davis-Bacon requirement make sense? If it does not, it doesn't, and we don't move forward.
That, just to help finish, that looks at the income level. And
I'm sorry, and I should have explained. No, David Bacon sets the wages. So on a federal project, they're federal wages. In some cases, you'll find that the communities mirror up pretty close anyway. So that's part of what we look at. We have to get, and they've got different wage settings for street issues than other issues. And so we have to get a Davis-Bacon wage schedule from the Department of Community Development. And then we look at what the local market already supports. If it's close, then it doesn't become a challenge for us. If there's a big difference, then we look at what that cost difference would be compared to what we might be able to receive. And if it doesn't make sense, it doesn't make sense. We don't move forward.
If I can just make a comment on it as I'm thinking about that, you talk about the government's responsibility for health, safety, and welfare of the citizenry. And I know we've years about, with our city growing, the need for another fire station to accommodate acceptable response times. And so I would think that if the funds are available and it can be used for fire stations, maybe we ought to consider that as well.
Okay, so what this means is you can come on up and talk to us if you want about any project you might think would be good for our city. Public hearing. You can come and, or not.
I've heard a lot about the need for a new fire. I wondered if that's eligible.
Very limited, but there is some. Fire is the only apparatus that is considered. Brick and mortar typically is the issue, but with fire, they do allow a very limited apparatus, and it's also based upon a minimum dollar amount. So at $200,000, but yes, that's a good point, and that's a good one to know.
You should
Considering this-
introduce yourself. I'm sorry. I
I'm
should
sorry,
have
my
called
name is
you.
Daniel Clough. I'm just a citizen here. And hearing the basic outline of this, I would be interested because when I think of our downtown Washington City, I really miss some of the things like, you know, the food amenities that we had with the burger place and stuff like that. Is there any way in which we can open it up for like food trucks or some sort of a farmer's market or any type of area designation which we could improve or improve and create for that type of a interaction within our community? I thought that was kind of an interesting thing that we used to have. And I like that.
Well, as it relates to the CDBG, no, it would not cover
Okay.
that. But you know, that could be a separate question outside of the CDBG with respect to that. And just so you know, we have opened up the city to allow those services recently.
So I'm new.
But that's okay. That's a good question. But no, that wouldn't cover the CDBG under this.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Plus,
Daniel.
plus our burger joint went away, I think, when UDOT came in and widened the road, so UDOT took too much of the roadway to keep the burgers store there.
Any other comment on this? How about from council?
Jaden Smith. I'm just going to agree with what Colleen said on the fire truck. I think that'd be a needed resource for the city.
Thank you, Jane. Not seeing any other takers out there. So do we need to close the public hearing?
Yeah, Mayor, I'll make the motion that the council close the public hearing that was held to consider the potential projects for the CDBG grant for the year 2016.
I'll second that motion with the caveat. We certainly appreciate the inputs there because that's,
Absolutely.
yeah, those fire trucks and stations. Yeah.
Jason, aye.
Truman, aye.
Staley, aye.
Segmiller, aye.
Very high.
Thank you, gentlemen. We'll move on to item 9, Community Center. Consideration to approve the Washington City policy and procedures for park and recreation field allocations. Cole Staley, Recreation and Fitness Manager.
Well, thank you for spending a considerable amount of time last evening in the workshop session discussing the content of the draft copy proposed Parks and Recreation field allocation manual that's specific to our new Sullivan Virgin River Park and the Washington City baseball and softball complex. Tonight, I provided to each of the council members as well as the mayor an electronic copy via Google Docs today of the most updated version with input and any changes that have been made recently. I've also got, as was requested last night, hard copies. If any of you feel like you want to have a printed copy, I've got those available for each of you as well. Just let me know and I'll hand those to you. So the intent, of course, Mayor, this evening in addressing you and the council was to seek final approval for that particular manual.
Any other questions or comments on that?
I would ask, I apologize, I know that it's not until next month that you'll be considering the master fee schedule for the city. But my hope is as part of the approval process tonight is not only policies and procedures, but also the proposed rates that are contained inside that document.
Thank you.
Mayor, I want to thank Councilman Truman. I know he's worked on this a lot, and last night a number of his edits and comments were also considered. It's a new world we're entering when we've got fields and ballparks that are high enough demand, no policy for it. But I think you've presented that reality exists, and especially with the new soccer complex, that it's now twofold. And so we're off to a good. Last night we did mention that if this policy passes tonight, we'd kind of like to bring it back next December and talk about it and see if there's some good things and some bad things and what we learned that didn't.
That'd be appropriate.
Mayor, if there's no other questions from the council, I'll make the motion that the council approve the Washington City policy and procedures for park and recreation field allocations.
Can I take a look at the hard copy just one quick minute before we vote on
Absolutely,
that?
yes.
I'm having a hard time accessing here my Google Docs. It's like they've already denied my access.
Are there any others that want to?
Sure, okay. Let's pass them out, Cole. That'd be great. Thank you.
Mayor, I'll go ahead and second the motion. We'll have it for discussion, but there is a second.
I have a motion and a second, pending any additional questions from Councilman Truman.
I hope I didn't offend you, Mayor, by wearing BYU blue tonight.
Well,
Shows well.
you did not.
Shows
I was
well.
going to say, if the mayor's offended, we've got two here squeezing a little.
Okay. It wasn't on purpose.
It's all right. I did teach one of the wide receivers in primary, so I'm kind of
You've got a-
Mitch Matthews.
Mitch Matthews, number 10. So if he catches a touchdown pass or two, I'll be okay.
You're the one that put that stuff in the cookies that got him so tall.
That's right.
Nobody catches 5 or 6 touchdowns.
We'll end that discussion.
Okay. I'm
You
ready.
okay, Ron?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we have a motion and a second to approve.
Nice and aye.
Truman, aye.
Staley, aye.
Segmiller, aye.
Okay.
And again, I'd like to, Cole, say thank you very much. That was a lot of time and effort that you put into that, and we really appreciate it. And just get after it, move on, and if we can help you anywhere, you just let us know.
Thank you for your support. The work begins now.
Yeah.
In other
Thank
words,
you.
Cole, let the games begin.
Yes. Okay, item 10, Power Department. Item A, consideration to approve revisions to the Washington City Underground Construction Standard. Kelly Carlson.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a brief explanation about what the underground construction standards are. Back in '93, we had a lot of contractors coming into the city, and they were just doing construction any way they wanted without any guidance whatsoever. And we were getting some pretty poor quality installation on some of our underground, particularly high voltage underground installations. And so we looked around the state and found a number of different cities that had an underground standards, and we took that through our engineering firm and adopted a standard that was applicable to our city. Since that time, the standards have not been updated other than a couple of very minor changes. And so I'd like to give you a level summary of some of the changes that have occurred in this document. And if you're not comfortable with the high level summary, then we can come back in a workshop and review the document in detail. But this document is meant for guidance of the contractors to follow the ordinance pertaining to city standards so that we get the type of installation in the system that we want to see out there, good quality work. So some of the changes, the first change is clarified the procedures under contractors' responsibilities. Some of the wording was very vague, so we just made it perfectly clear what their responsibilities are. One of which is they have to be certified, which means they have to read this document, come to us and take a written test. We don't charge them for it. If they pass that test, they're certified and they go ahead and go out in the field and install. So that way we know if we walk out there and they're doing it wrong, they know they're doing it wrong, that's for that.
Kelly, just one question with that. How is that test administered? I mean, is it at their request? Do we do it on a?
It's at their request.
Okay, so
Yeah.
we'll accommodate that request from them.
Yep. Yeah, if they come in and say, I've got an opportunity to bid on this project, but I need to be certified, we set up a time for them. They study the manual, they come in for 1 hour, take a test, and
I know a neighboring city did something similar to this with their water department, and it became quite inundating to them because as people would get things, all of a sudden it's like, well, we don't have personnel to come and sit with you with your test.
Yeah, I could see why it would for water, because you've got so many contractors out there. With power, probably in this county, you've only got 6 or 7 that are qualified.
Yeah, it's a
So
little different now.
you get a
That's why I
few,
just wanted to make sure that we were going to be able to accommodate
Yeah.
them in a timely fashion.
we can do it.
So
Number 2, we clarified stencil size and types allowed under the general requirements. What that means is when they set a transformer or switch gear, we need it identified as to which circuit and what phase. So there was really no standard. Some would paint on it, some would mark it with chalk, some would put a sticker on it, and all of those things deteriorate over time. So we decided to clarify that it had to be stencil size and specific type that we want to see on the system. So it was uniform across the board. Number 3, changes were made for safety procedures to no longer allow contractors access to energized equipment on inside our high voltage switch to do work without notifying us, and that's not allowed. And it's not allowed under OSHA guidelines as well. So we've made sure that they know that they have to contact us, and we'll come and do the work for them. If it's extensive work, we'll submit them and bid them to take care of the problem. So change number 4, we changed our primary four-ways from steel to fiberglass to eliminate rusting problems that occur over time and allow for better and safer access for our employees. They're a different design, they're more accessible, and they're safer to get down inside and do work on. So number 5, we eliminated our loss evaluation standards that were created in the original document on transformers. The new standard is we've adopted the DOE, Department of Energy standard that's implemented nationally and effective January 2016. It's a much better standard, and it creates a situation where the vendors are actually required by DOE to produce the product as an energy efficient product to the high that they are required by DOE standards. And it's much better than the standard that we previously had. Eliminates a lot of my time to do a loss evaluation on a transformer and determine if it's suitable for our system or not. So it's a very good change. We updated the grounding techniques for safety reasons from the 93 industry standards to the standards required today under our safety manual policies. We upgraded primary vaults to include pulling eyes. I'm not sure if you know what that means, but it's like the end of a C hook that's actually built right in the concrete so that we can hook a chain to it and put a roller on it and be able to pull wire safely into the vault without causing damage to the cable when it comes into the vault. So we're requiring ladders be installed because these vaults are 6 feet deep and sometimes they're very difficult to get out, especially for some of our smaller employees. So ladders are required, and welded hinges for safety purposes and to eliminate unauthorized access. What we've found over time is copper thieves come along and they find these hinges that are actually a pin type hinge, and they'll cut one side of the pin off with a hacksaw and pop the pin out with a punch and a hammer, climb down there in a live vault energized at 12,470 volts, and they'll cut all the ground wires out of there. And we've actually had some that have flashed it over and burnt their bolt cutters up. Surprisingly, we haven't found a dead body down there, but with this change, we'll prevent that from happening. So let's see, modified the street lighting reference within the document to allow for only induction street lighting based on the revised city policy under the Siemens program. So those are all high-level changes. I think the most important thing for us is the safety aspect of the grounding, that we're the only ones authorized to enter live switchgear vaults. So any questions on that?
One question I had is what was the instigator for these changes? Was there
The document was so old that a lot of the nameplates for manufacturers that we had in it, even some of them didn't exist anymore. And some of the specifications we had for grounding lugs and grounding bolts were no longer manufactured. And so it just came time that the document became so outdated that we couldn't enforce it. I asked my current staff to go through the document, working with our engineering firm, and compare what was in the document versus what the industry standard is today, what the manufacturers recommend today. And we actually called the manufacturers for their specifications to compare those vendor by vendor to see how accurate they were.
So it was an internal effort to just modernize our standard.
Yes, it's brought it up to industry standards for today's specifications.
Any other questions for Kelly? Need a vote on this? Okay. Entertain a vote to consider the revisions.
Here, I'll make the motion that we approve the revisions to the Washington City Underground Construction Standard Manual as has been presented to us.
Motion.
Have a motion and a second.
Nice and I.
I typically would rather see this in work session first, but trust you, Kelly, so I'll go with give you an eye.
Rick, aye.
Thank you.
So noted, Chris. I appreciate that. Yeah.
The document was provided. If you'd like to review it and come back with any questions or comments, please feel free to do so. It should have been in the packet. So.
I couldn't find it in the packet.
Yeah, I think it was in our current packet. I saw it, it was shared with us, I think via an email a couple, 3 weeks ago, if I remember right. Denise just shared it via an email.
I'll ask.
I was looking here because I thought it would be included in our packet. And that's, I couldn't.
I'll just ask our recorder to share it again for you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to item B, consideration to approve a resolution adopting the revised power rate study and rates. Kelly Carlson. I know we have a lot of interest in this portion of our meeting. I would like to have Mark, you said Beauchamp? Yep. Got it right. I'd like to have Mark talk to you all about how we come about thinking about this and putting it together and all the structure. And then I'd love to entertain some comments and questions and all that.
And Mayor, just for the audience's benefit, as I stated last night, this council commissioned a cost of service and rate study back in 2014. The results of those cost of service studies were presented in late February of this year. And we wanted to wait until the fiscal year 2015 budget was complete, so we had the most up-to-date information to make sure that our numbers were as accurate as possible to get this before council. And we had the audit, the final year-end budget reports to come out before we could start completing the study, and that's why we're here today. So with that, I'll turn the time over to Mr. Mark Beauchamp with Utility Financial Services.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here again. And yesterday we talked, went through some of the slides. Now, I did add a few slides based on the feedback and the comments yesterday from the council. And so I did some modifications to give you a little bit more, especially with respect to the rate impacts on the varying levels of usage. What I want to start with, and this is a new slide, I added 2 new financial projection slides, and this is more related to what you saw back in February, where we did and we showed the council what the financials would look like without any rate adjustments. Track, which we 0.%. But if you look at this slide, if we didn't do anything with rates, I want you to first look at the right-hand side, debt coverage ratio, which the minimum level of debt coverage ratio we need to maintain is 1.4. That's at a minimum. In 2016, without a rate adjustment, we will exceed that target. But in 2018, we'd actually be below that target. Remember, there's 3 targets we look at. That's the first one. So at that point, we'd be in trouble in 2018. The second thing is cash reserves. And without a rate adjustment in 2016, our cash reserves are at $4 million. Our minimum cash is 3.7. So we're actually exceeding it without a rate adjustment. If you look at 2017, our cash reserves are projected to drop to about $2 million. And in 2018, we'd actually be negative in our cash reserves. The third target we look at is the adjusted operating income. And we're currently running at an operating loss of about $258,000 that's projected for 2016. Those operating losses are projected to get worse each year. And in 2018, our operating losses will be a little over $1 million. I want to show what would happen, or if we could delay this rate adjustment. And if we didn't do anything in 2016, and of course, there's a number of different alternatives with respect to rate adjustments, but what I have here is 2 8% increases in 2017 and in 2018. And if you look at our cash reserves, we're still below the minimum target in 2018. And the reason that's happening is because that 4.9% increase in 2016 is adding to that cash. We're getting the benefit of that for an additional year. So to delay an increase, basically we would probably need about an 8% increase in the 2 subsequent years to maintain the financial integrity of the electric utility. Now, this is the rate track that you saw yesterday with the 3 4.9% adjustments. And with this rate track, we're still falling a little bit below on our cash reserve target. We're targeting 4 million. We're at 3 million in 2018, but we're real close to it in the subsequent years. The operating income is projected to be positive at 242,000 positive in 2016. And in 2018, it'd be about $600,000 positive. First debt coverage is not an issue. And so I wanted to show you those, is what would happen, and if there was an option to delay this rate adjustment. And of course, whenever you delay rate adjustment, it tends to make things worse at a future time. And that's what the projection is showing. This is the results of the cost of service study that was completed earlier this year. And overall, the study showed the need for a 15% rate adjustment. We're not recommending that. We're recommending a phase-in of that. But there were some variations between customer classes. This slide shows how much it costs to provide service to each class of customers and compares it to the projected revenues. So if you look at the residential class, it costs us about $7.4 million to provide service. The projected revenues is about $6.1 million. So the cost of service study is showing the need for a 20% rate adjustment. We're not recommending that, but we are recommending movements toward correcting that. The small commercial shows the need for a 9% adjustment, and the large commercial a 3%. And again, this is how much it costs to provide service to each class of customers. Now, before I move on, the next section I have is the rate designs and the rate design options. And what we have is proposing is a 3-year rate track, or rates to be approved for 3 years. And in addition, based on the feedback we got from the council back in February, make slight movements toward cost of service. In other words, to try to correct some of the variations in the classes, the cross subsidization in effect. So if you look at this first slide in 2016, overall, we're proposing a 4.9%, but the residentials would get a 1% higher adjustment than that average. So they would get a 5.9%. Small commercial, 5.4%, and the large commercial would see a 3% rate adjustment. The rate adjustments for 2017 and for 2018 were very similar. In 2017, a 5.8% adjustment for residential, 5.1% for small commercial, 2.9% adjustment for the large commercial. Again, an overall increase of 4.9%. In 2018, you see the percentages are virtually identical, 5.9, 5, and 3. For again, a 4.9% adjustment. Now, what we have is some alternative rate structures to consider for the residential and the small commercial class. And if you look at the first alternative for the residential, what we proposed in this alternative is the current monthly customer charge is $11.50. We're proposing that be increased to $16.50. So it's a $5 increase in the first year. And then we keep that monthly customer charge the same. Also in 2016, we would decrease the usage components or usage charges slightly for the second and the third block. So basically the first block of energy would stay at the same rate. The second block would go down slightly to 10.4, and the excess would go down from 11.3 to 11 cents. Now, obviously, in looking at this, the big question, now, overall, the average impact on a residential customer is $5 a month of this rate change. And if you look at this slide, this one shows the impacts at varying levels of usage. Now, you can see that if you look at the dollar change, which is the second column from the right, pretty much everybody is impacted at, at the rate of $5. The only, that's the maximum increase that any residential customer could see. If they go above 1,500, they'd actually see slightly less of an increase dollar-wise. But between zero usage and 1,500 kilowatt hours, which is the majority of your residential ratepayers, they would see about a $5 increase. The average residential customer uses about 820 kilowatt hours. Of course, that includes all of your residentials, both seasonal customers are included. So the average residential bill is currently at $77.92 a month. And this would adjust that upward to $82.92 at the average usage. That's the first alternative. The second alternative is a phase-in of that monthly customer charge.
Back up on that one. Obviously, in the first year, that's correct, because you're just adding it to the service fee. But what would happen in 2017 under those various usage rates? Do you have something for that?
I didn't show that specifically in this.
Because then you'd have variations.
You would have some variations, yeah, but it'd be right around in that $5 range.
So you got the upper end of the usage.
In the second and the third, the upper ends would see a higher dollar amount. So the average being 820, they would see $4.92. If they used above 820, their dollar impact would be adjusted upward. It would go up a little higher under that scenario. Now, the second alternative, which is a $1.50 increase in the monthly customer charge from $11.50 to $13. And then in the second year, it will go to $14.75 and then $16.50. If you look at the bottom, the average dollar impact, it's about the same. But the spread is going to be different. And you see that. The dollar impact is the average residential customer in 2016 is $4.78 and $5.03 in 2017 and $5.44 in 2018. Now in 2016, the dollar impact at 820 kilowatt hours of consumption would increase by $4.78. So it'd go from $77.92 to $82.70. And you can see that the more the usage, the higher the dollar impact. The higher the dollar impact, but the lower the percentage impact. I want to emphasize that. The percentage impact at 420 is actually about 7%. At 1,200 kilowatt hours of usage is 5.78. But the dollar impact's greater. And one of the key questions is with respect to the rate adjustments for residential, what would be the preference of council on I think a phase-in of the monthly customer charge, or to go from $11.50 to $16.50 all at once? That's one of the key questions. The second one relates to the small commercial. The small commercial class, the customers in this class have a varying amount of usage. But what we did is the cost of service study showed that the demand charge should be adjusted upward. It actually showed the energy rate should be slightly lower than we're charging. So what we did is we tried to phase it in over time. And so the monthly customer charge would remain the same at $22.50. The energy rate on both the first block and the excess would again remain the same as it is today. The demand charge per kW would increase from $7.25 to $8.75, then $10.25 and then to 1180. Now, the overall rate impact on these customers also vary percentage-wise. It's between 5 and 5.5% each year. That's the first alternative. So it's staying with the current method, which when it comes to the way you bill small commercial, I wish I could get every utility in the country to bill the way that you do. Because the most accurate way to recover cost, especially distribution cost, is by having demand charge in your rates. And most utilities, a lot of them historically have set parameters and they only bill them on energy only usage, which creates subsidization. So most utilities are moving that threshold downward to try to make more and more customers be billed on demand, but you're already there. But I did nevertheless propose an alternative to on that demand and the second alternative. And what we did here is we said, okay, we will give the first 3 kW of demand without charging. The demand charges, if you look at the bottom part of it, remain the same, 725, 875, and so on. But if you look at the first block energy, because we have to pick up the 3 kW of billing demand that we're basically not charging for. So we had to recover it in the first block of energy. So the first block of energy would go from 6.75 cents per kilowatt to 9.05, then to 9.4 and 9.8. So, and again, we had to do that to try to recover, because if we give away the 3 kW free, in a sense, it's not really free, but not charge for it, then the only way to recover it from the appropriate customers is through the kilowatt hour rate. So the second thing for the board council to consider is which small commercial alternative would you like to keep with your current billing structure, or to modify it where we would basically not charge for the first 3 kW of billing demand. The large commercial, this one has the smallest increase. And again, that's the movement toward cost of service. That's a direction. And so the large commercial would have a 3% increase in 2016, 2.9% in 2017, and 3% in 2018. And looking at this rate, again, the increases, for the most part, went into the kW demand charge. We did increase the monthly customer charge, but it has a relatively small impact on this size of a customer. To go from $32.50 to $42.50, a $10 increase, is a relatively small impact on say a $10,000 bill. But where we're recovering it is through that demand charge increase, and that's where we're picking up that additional 3% of revenue. So that's the last slide I have, and I was wondering if I could field any questions you had on the presentation.
We had a lengthy discussion on it last night, so I think my questions have been addressed at this point.
Obviously, we probably haven't addressed because it hasn't been presented, but in looking in comparisons with all the other communities in our county, especially with our small commercial and the demand charge, almost inevitably every other community doesn't charge that demand charge until they go over a 10,000 or a high usage area.
Correct.
What impacts would that make on ours? I'm assuming you may not have looked at it, but off the top of your head, if we were to follow suit with something like that.
Well, the impacts, what would happen is right now you have a very accurate rate structure. And you'd be moving away from that because of what the area is doing. You've already invested the money in the demand metering for these customers, which is a cost related to that. And so you'd be moving away from something that is, if I had my way, what you're going to see, this is the Mark Bosch's future of electric rate making going forward, is you're going to see demand charges be billed to all customers, all the way down to the residential level in the future. And the reason for that is the metering technologies have come down. It's more cost effective to install AMI type systems and to get the information. The only reason we have not billed residential's demands is because we've never had that information. And so what you're going to see is the demand charge being used more and more for all customers. I mean, right now in the last year, there's 2 utilities we did work for. We implemented residential demand charges on all the residential customers because they had AMI. And that's the trend that we're seeing in the industry. It's not just public power. It's also investor-owned utilities are moving in that direction. Commonwealth Edison, they proposed through the Public Service Commission to have all of the residential customers in the state of Illinois charge demand charges. So the reason for that is accuracy, because we don't size our distribution infrastructure to handle kilowatt hours. We size it to handle the peak demands, and the demand charge picks that up. And it used to be like residential, and I apologize for going deep here, but when you go back 10 or 20 years, the residential customers are what you could consider a homogeneous class. They all pretty much used electricity at the same time of the day. They pretty much were within a range, used approximately the same amount of electricity. And so, yeah, we might be off a little bit, but we're in the ballpark versus investing in meters. But the problem is the way our industry has changed. Residential customers are no longer a homogeneous class. You have, with the energy efficiency programs, the setback thermostats, solar energy, usage is just changing. It's all over. So you have a lot of residential customers now that use little energy, some that use a lot. So it's no longer this homogeneous class. So what happens is without a demand charge, you're creating a subsidy between the customers within the class, which used to be relatively small, and we weren't concerned about it. But now it's become bigger and bigger and bigger. And so the demand charge helps to prevent that. And I dug deep on that to explain it, but
So if I can summarize your answer very well, what you said is that all of the other cities in the county are subsidizing a degree of consumption by doing that?
absolutely. What they're doing is they're subsidizing what we would classify as low load factor customers at the expense of the higher load factor customer. Load factor is a ratio, it's an efficiency ratio. The ratio between a customer's peak demand and their average demand. And so a low load factor customer, there's a big difference between the peak and the average. That you could classify it, for example, just to give you a general idea, an 8-hour-a-day operation probably has a load factor of about 35 to 40% ratio. A high load factor, say like a Walmart or a 24-hour-a-day industrial operation, is probably in the 60 to 70% load factor range. Okay. And so what happens when you have a higher load factor and you buried those capacity costs into energy, high load factor customers end up bearing an unfair share of their infrastructure costs or overcharged. And who's benefiting is low load factor.
And what is the public policy reasons why so many of our neighboring municipalities would do that?
It could be a couple of reasons. Historically, it was cost related because demand meters previously used to be fairly expensive. So we tended to only want to use them on larger customers so we could cost justify it. Now, as the metering costs and technologies cause it to drop, Now you're fighting history. And you're fighting what's happened in the past. And to move from let's say a 50 kW threshold down to 0 is going to have dramatic impacts on customers in that year that you switch over. So it causes a big jump. Some customers are going to see big increases, some decreases. Now in your situation, you've already done it. Why go backwards? That makes sense? You're already there.
When you presented your slides and we talked about projected expenses, projected revenue for the electric utility, one of the words that jumped out to me was the cost of service. Because over the first 3 years on the council, my recollection was that we were told that the electric utility is fine. We're charging appropriate rate. We don't have a crisis.
Mhm.
In February, when you came, you presented numbers and you talked about a cost of service
Correct.
that was going to exceed our revenue that we pull
Yeah.
in. So my question is, are we calculating this cost of service different from this point forward than we have in the past?
It was calculated the same way.
Are we adding in costs of capital improvements, projects, or depreciation that weren't necessarily being accounted for in the past?
In my understanding, it was accounted for in previous studies and was accounted for in the past. It's a lot of times when it comes to rates or rate adjustments, even though small adjustments are needed, it's not always, the utility says we can get by in a sense. And sometimes those, and I'm just speculating, but sometimes those smaller rate adjustments at some point start to catch up. You haven't had a rate adjustment since what, 2006. So, it's been, 10 years.
So is this the same cost of service? I mean, what plus what plus what equals cost of service in your study basis the way it was determined in years
I
past?
can't confirm that either way. Anything I would say would be speculation. All I can
What
tell
are the components of cost of service?
the components of cost of service. And to explain that, I'm going to reference you to the adjusted operating income. It's called the utility basis. Utility basis includes 3 components to determine revenue requirements. And when I say revenue requirements, that means how much we need to recover from customers in the rates we're charging. Those 3 components of revenue requirement is 1, operation and maintenance cost, 2, depreciation expense, and 3, rate of return. Now, it's called a utility basis, right? And now depreciation expense is a non-cash expenditure. But every year, like sandpaper, when you make investments in infrastructure, customers are using and consuming that asset and wearing down. If you don't have a component to recover that replacement cost in your rates, you're basically asking for the next generation to replace the infrastructure that you've used and consumed. Third component, rate of return, which probably sounds unusual. But rate of return, it's not a rate of return to make money. It's a rate of return to break even. And it's determined by looking at the inflationary increase in an asset's replacement cost. To give you an example, if you put $1 million asset in service with a 20-year life, and you only charge depreciation expense, at the end of 20 years, you theoretically have recovered $1 million to replace the asset. But it's going to cost more than that to replace it, because every year the replacement cost of that asset goes up. That's that rate of return component. Now, and it's because we're non-for-profit, that target is established at the break-even level. We're not, like if you were to invest in your own utility, they target rates of return of 9 to 11%, but that's misleading because that's after federal income tax. So they're actually charging rates of return of 13, 14, 15%. The public power system, it's usually in the 5 to 6% range as far as the rate of return. So compared to an investor-owned utility, that's 3 times that. All right. But that's how we determine the rates. But with that said, even though that's the ideal of what we're striving for, cash is still king. And that's why we look at those cash basis targets in establishing the rate track. And that's why we look at debt coverage ratio and we look at cash reserves. Because we have to make sure that we have enough cash. And the other component of it is you always get concerned when you work for public power. I work for hundreds around the country. When you see large cash balances, not that necessarily that they've overcharged their customers. I'm talking about excessive, like in your case, $20 million. Isn't that's not needed or not necessary? It's needed in the future, but it can still put the utility under a lot of criticism. So we look at it both ways. We look at it if there's a perception that could be too much or if it's too low. So I hope that helped to explain it.
Historically, in our cost of service calculation, when the numbers seem to be just fine, were we bringing in depreciation and rate of return to the extent that we are now?
I think that's a question. It is, yes. Kelly says they were. It may have been calculated differently because the way I do rate of return is we have a certain methodology that we use, which I'm sure is unique in our industry. But for the most part, that's only one small component. But they use O&M and they use depreciation expense, and they added a rate of return component to it.
This doesn't include any portion for new substations or things like that.
Now, this is how that works under the utility basis. If you look at the capital improvement program, we have about $2 million to $2.5 million projected in capital expenses each year. And when you add a substation, you have, as far as the initial payment, it either comes out of your cash reserves if it exists and you're able to stay above your minimum, or you can bond for it. Okay, but you can't charge for that infrastructure until you place it in service. Once it's placed in service, now you start depreciating it. Now you start charging the customers for the asset as it's consumed.
Right, but a lot of these substations, we're going to use impact fee money.
Correct.
On building the new.
What we do with that is we look at the amount of assets that, in a sense, is contributed assets, which would be the impact fee money. So what we do there is we don't charge depreciation expense on that asset, which probably what I just said sounds unusual. But when you have, when a customer pays for asset, like you have two ways. The utility can pay for the asset, or you can charge the customer directly for the asset. And it's called contributed assets. That asset, once it's paid for by the customer, and then they donate it to this utility, gets placed on the utility's books. What we don't want to do is then to turn around and charge depreciation expense on that contributed asset because we haven't paid for it. Which I know on the surface sounds unusual. You can say, well, we don't have any money to replace it. That's absolutely correct. But you haven't spent any money either. So under the first scenario, if you spent $1 million and then you charge depreciation expense to recover the $1 million, you net to zero. $1 million cash outflow, $1 million worth of inflow, nets to zero. Under a contributed asset, if you have $1 million asset that's donated, your cash expenditures are zero. If you charge depreciation expense, now you're recovering $1 million, It's not netting to zero, it's netting to $1 million. So you're double charging customers. So we back that out.
So how would you account for replacement of that asset when it's time to be replaced?
You either, at that time, you either
They're not going to
replace
give
it.
it to you again. They gave it to you the first
They
time.
do,
so-
absolutely. And you, at that point, you replace the asset by funding it either through your cash reserves or through bonds. Then you charge. You can't charge customers for something that you haven't paid anything for. It results in double charging. So it's not, usually it's not a real significant item in electric, although in some cases, water and wastewater can be a huge difference.
So would it be fair to summarize this graph up there, that when you look at cash reserves, impact fee contributions, and you look at capital improvement schedule, we don't have sufficient cash reserves or impact fee revenues to maintain that capital improvement schedule without a fee increase?
Correct. That's correct. If you look at this first scenario, in 2 years, 3 years, you'd be out of money. I mean, your cash balance would be negative.
So to avoid a rate increase, we'd have to change our capital improvement schedule.
That would only be a temporary fix. It would, when it comes to the ideal rate setting, this is going to sound really strange. Your capital improvement program doesn't directly impact it, only a small amount in the first year. You have a capital improvement program, you have two ways of funding it. The initial cash expenditure, either through cash reserves internally or through issuing debt or bonds. But when it comes, that's how you fund the initial project. But when it comes to turning around and charging it to customers, it's charged back to them through the depreciation expense and the rate of return. Funding, so that initial capital.
So are you saying that even if we zero future capital improvements out to zero,
It would have minimal impact.
prior capital improvements have been sufficient enough that our rate still needs to increase?
They would still need to increase, correct?
Yeah, I'm not comfortable with the rate increase. I expressed a lot of my concerns last night. They still focus around these prior 3 years and the improvements that we did do and representations that were made to us. I think that for my part, I want to look a lot deeper at those and try and better understand how we got here.
One of the things I just want to caution you about is the more you delay it, the harder it's going to be. And when you look at this slide, I wanted to run a scenario where what would occur if we did delay it. And the projection that we would be targeting, or the utility would need, upwards of 8% increases in the subsequent 2 years. And you start getting in above that 5%, you start getting some complaints from customers, especially large users. And we're even pushing close to that double digit, increase, which we always want to try to avoid. And reality, I mean, a 4.9% increase, it's $5 a month, an average residential customer, to keep the utility financially sound and keep the lights on, so to speak. And the
Ask
more,
a question. I just want to make sure I heard you right. We zeroed out the capital improvements for the next 3 years to where there were none. Your study reflects that a rate increase is needed.
it would still be needed. It'd be needed under a different target. It'd be needed under the target operating income. Cash reserves would rise, but we still, the need for that capital improvement hasn't gone away. All we're doing is delaying it, and it's going to get bigger in the future. So eliminating the capital improvement program is only a short-term fix. And what it's going to mean is bigger increases in the future, because we're looking at cash now.
My goal is not to eliminate improvement. It's to understand how we got here. When for so long we were, it was represented that there wasn't the need to increase rates. That's what my goal is to understand.
sometimes when it comes to, and I don't know what has occurred in the past, but I know from my experience, when we do rate adjustments, sometimes they show relatively modest adjustments where it's not really worth having adjustments. It's easier to combine some years together. And I don't know if that's what's happened, or maybe expenses have just rose.
On these,
I'm not sure.
on these projected revenues or projected expenses, what about, has belt tightening been considered?
I would, I guess I'd have to defer that question to Kelly. We're looking at the information that we're given. I will tell you this though. We do not use our budgets. We use our projections in establishing these financial projections. So the only budget item that we use from the utility is a capital improvement program. Everything else is based on our projections. The reason we do that is because our experience in working with public power systems is if we base budgets, when you compare budgets to actuals, a lot of times the budgets tend to be, there's a certain amount of basically factors in the budget in case, in a sense, bad things happen during the year. So we don't want that necessarily factored in the rates. So what we do is we look back historically at how much has been spent, and then we project it forward. So that's not built into our rate design. So the rates are based on is something that's a reasonable projection of expenses. That makes sense? So it's not, we don't use the budgets except for capital.
Yeah, I appreciate the work you've done here, and I don't think there's anybody on the city council who wants to see us without power, or have power shut down, or have power when we need it. I think the reluctance you're seeing and the concern we all have is that, I think Councilman Nyson hit it on the head. We're not comfortable that we're operating as efficiently as we can be operating to offset a rate increase, right? And so we all know that we can hire experts to come in and go through and come up with whatever plan we want. We saw that when we talked about setting new impact fees, and we're grateful that Southern Utah Home Builders Association hired independent experts to take a look at our figures and say, well, did you think about this, this, and this? And I would think it might be prudent as citizens here to say, let's hire an independent consultant to come in and take a look at the efficiencies of the power department, or the areas rather than increasing rates, we can save money. And if we can't save money, and if we are very efficient, then I think we all come to the realization we need the increase to keep the lights on. But if not, then we need to be more efficient and do that. And then the other concern I have with the rate increases is I still think that if the rate goes up, a lot of us users are going to say we're going to use less power to offset that rate increase, and then you really haven't got anywhere. You're still in the same hole, and then the next year you have to say, well, we need a higher increase because we're using less electricity. It's just a never-ending cycle. And we can all say, well, $5, that's a hamburger and a shake. Well, by the time you add that and the other impact fees, pretty soon it's a steak and a lobster meal that we're paying for. So I just think we need to sit back and say, okay, if we're really efficient, then we need the increase. If we're not really efficient, let's hit that area first before we do it. Maybe we need another 6 months to take a look at that and figure out where we are.
If I could put something in a little bit of perspective, you have controllable costs and you have non-controllable costs. Non-controllable costs in large part is power supply. Power supply represents approximately 75% of your total cost structure. It's out of your control. So those efficiencies, to offset a 4.9% increase, you'd have to identify almost a 20% reduction in your controllable cost.
Maybe that's what we need is some independent person to come in and say, okay, here's what you need. I know we've had discussions about, let's bring our gas generator plants in and get those up and rolling so we can save money on this thing. And we can buy more of this. We can take some more blocks of this. We're hoping to get nuclear down the road. Who knows? We just need somebody to come in that the citizens, I think, can say, yeah, we trust these folks and we think this is in our best interest. do it, then we're gonna do the right thing.
It's, obviously it's, my biggest caution, my biggest concern is the more we delay, the harder it's going to be on your
we've delayed,
customers.
in this scenario, we've delayed 10 years already, and so we're sitting here saying, let's kind of work in a 17.7% or 17.6% increase over 3 years to make it palatable. But so if we already delayed 10, what's 6 months going to do to us? I don't know. You're saying, well, all of a sudden it'll be an 8% increase each year, and residential might be 9% then, if it's an 8 on average.
Well, part of the problem is when you, in this scenario, because it is so critical, if we delayed it 6 months, then to put us back on track, we need another increase 6 months later to put us back on track.
That's assuming all the figures are correct. And
Correct.
Yeah. I think we understand that, and need to be comfortable that the figures are accurate. And I personally am not, simply because everything we heard, Councilman Segmiller said, well, all along we've been told we're doing fine, we're doing fine. And all of a sudden, like the light switch went off, and all of a sudden we said, let's build these buildings, let's bring our generators over, and all of a sudden we're out of money. So we're all sitting here saying, what happened? We're uncomfortable.
The component in your projected expenses column that's causing those to increase, I'm assuming that's primarily non-controllable expenses, transmission and power costs.
That's buried in there, and that's a significant component of it. But a portion of it is your own distribution too. I mean, it's all of it combined.
Any more questions for Mark? Thank you, Mark. We do appreciate your time and effort, and we're not, because you're the messenger, and we appreciate that. And I hope you understand that.
I do. Thank you.
We know that this is a hard decision and a hard topic to talk about. So I would like to hear from some of our public if they're so inclined. So, and if they had questions for you, would that be okay also?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
Like the hard questions, we're still going to pay the bill.
That's right.
We appreciate his expertise.
Once again, I'm Daniel Clough. Within this, I feel greatly informed about the issue at hand. Thank you. One thing I've really appreciated is the public format of the Washington City Matters Facebook page, and it's really where I've got most of my information on this. I need to be a better informed citizen. One concern I have is I see that they're taking care of the viability of the company, making sure for this company to exist as it is, we need to make projections. I appreciate Councilman Staley bringing up, why is there an emergency all of a sudden? We went from 2006 just barely, and all of a sudden we have to go through 15% on paper, 20% overall change by the time you increase the exponential costs. My concern on this is, do I just have my blinders on now that this is going to fix the next 3 years? Or in 3 years from now, am I going to have another council meeting where it's going to be, well, those first 3 years we survived, that was wonderful. We're only going to have a break for about a year, and then now we have another 5, 10, 15% increase. I feel like most of this is targeted to patch something that we really don't understand. Is this really a viable concept that we're trying to do? Or like what Councilman Truman said, do we need to hire an independent investigation to come in and say, okay, is this company operating in a way which is viable and beneficial to our community? I have a lot of concerns with, we have something where it can only operate off of projections and not off of budgets. I wish I could do that at my house. That'd be wonderful. I project next year I'm gonna make $100,000 and I'm gonna make all of my bills based off of that. I don't feel like that's rational. I feel like as a business, they're different than me. I get that. I need to know as a community point of view, is this beneficial to keep patching, or should we sell this? I understand from Councilman Segmiller posting online, we can't verify what company will buy this power program. We can only put it out for bid and it can only be bought by another person. We can't verify that it will be bought by the best person in our interest. It may just change names and have the same problems. And that's my concerns. So overall, I don't know where to start with that. I guess I just kind of vomited everything I was concerned with at once. But are we putting our blinders on is my first concern. Is this a small term fix? And my overall thing is this a viable thing to our community to continue to treat as it is?
What we tonight is the presentation of an accumulation of a lot of experience and a financial perspective of how to keep the power company, the power utility, financially sound.
Right.
And behind all of this, there's a lot of things like our city has to buy power on the power market. And when those rates go up, we can't know when they're going to go up. The trend has been that they don't go down. And the same applies to things like transmission costs. Transmission costs haven't gone down. In fact, in the last couple of years, they've gone up significantly. And so power rates will probably never go down. His study was just for 3 years. But I mean, I've expressed it probably more than it deserved, but still have some questions about where we've been and where we're going, and if we can broaden our perspective on that. So I appreciate your comments.
Mayor and council, I know that this is listed as such that you don't have to take any discussion, so I appreciate you allowing people to give you a little bit of input. And to me, there's a lot of information here just in what was presented tonight. And I certainly don't understand it, and I don't feel like that you all totally understand it. And I think that there's a additional time that needs to be taken to try to fully flesh out and understand what it is that's being presented here and what the options are. You know, I know that to me, 20% increase is a significant increase, especially for people that might be on a fixed income or those people who are young families. And it depends on whether that 20% increase is on the base rate or whether it's on the total bill. Because in my mind, I have a significantly higher electric bill than $77. My electric bill went down $100 since I've been able to turn off my air conditioning, but my bill is still over $77. So I don't know, maybe I'm an electric hog. I don't know. I don't think I really am until I put up my Christmas lights, and I'm even kind of conservative on those, I think, compared to what I see a lot of people put up. So to me, that needs to be explained. I mean, yeah, $5 isn't a big deal, but you know, 20% of $200 is a bigger deal, significantly bigger deal. So I would like to see that explained and understood. And I realize, you know, they say that there's no inflation. Abomination says that Social Security recipients don't deserve a cost of living increase. Well, there's a lot of other people, you know, that aren't on a fixed income, but they can't go and say our outflow is greater than our income. Therefore, I need you, my boss, to give me a 20% increase. They'd be laughed out of the shop or terminated, one of the two. So, you know, those are some difficult realities that I think people are faced with. And again, I realize that electricity has to be bought. I know that it has to be bought in advance, but I know that when the city went into this power business, it was sold on the basis that it was going to be cheaper and better for the citizens of Washington City. And I'm not sure if we have to take a 20% increase on top of an already much higher rate than most of the adjoining communities around here, and especially Dixie REA, that is necessarily true anymore. And I think that there's a lot of options that need to be explored, a lot of questions that need to be answered. And again, I realize that Abomination is trying to shut down everything that has a smokestack on it, and that's going to cause electricity rates to exponentially increase. And I think we all understand those realities. But I think if you would at least table this tonight and make the rate study available and the rates available and some information available to the public so that we could try to digest it. I'm old and I'm dumb, so I may not be able to, assimilate it and be able to make any better comments than I'm making tonight. But I think it would at least give people an opportunity, and yourselves, as well as, looking at bringing in other independent individuals or companies or whatever to look at what it is we're doing and what the options are and what's going to be best for the citizens of Washington City. That would, in my mind, be a good thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
I'm Lance Paxman. Bob kind of asked the same questions I had. The question I have is, I didn't understand a lot of them numbers, but if it's a projection, I would think that cities would be the same, I would think. But like Hurricanes are quite a bit less, St. George's less, they just had an increase. I just looked it up on the internet a little bit, if it's right, of 7%, and they're still under where we are right now before your increase. So I don't know. I know that they buy power and all that, and that's going to go up, but I don't know, maybe if you could see why it's less in other cities than it is here, because that's got to be in part of the difference of what you're paying for the power and what, I don't know. I'm not very articulate, but I appreciate your judgment.
Lance, just to answer maybe a little portion of that. The biggest thing is your portfolio of where we buy power and how we buy power. And obviously, because we're a younger power company than like St. George, a large chunk of their power actually comes out of the Glen Canyon Dam out of Lake Powell. And it's still there and viable. That's where, when we took the big increase, we had a dam power out of Idaho that the environmental issue said, you got to tear the dam out so the fish can get upstream. We lost our power. And so that puts us in the position we are today.
Right.
That's kind of the picture. I mean, it's, like you say, it's a convoluted, it's huge.
Because I figured St. George could buy it cheaper because they have more if it's a volume thing.
Well, some of it is, some of it's just being they were in the right place at the right time. They were in the power business when that came available to buy.
Right. And then Hurricane's less in St. George, I've seen, and they're a smaller community. So I was wondering,
and some of that with Hurricane actually, and this is the game that gets played in cities. Hurricane just raised their base rate. They lowered this rate.
So
it's as you say, what comes out of your wallet still comes out of your wallet.
Right.
If you look on the internet, it says, oh, they've got a better rate. But it's really coming out of the wallet.
Yeah, so I'm not really comparing things.
Yeah.
And I don't know about the average. If it's only $77, man, you could times that by about 3 and I'd be happy.
No, I think that average is a little low because I've spent the last couple of days quite a bit of time researching, mainly Washington County. I want to see what hey, we down here. And we have a lot of the same expenses predominantly and issues. And so from my studies, it says that the average user is 1,200 to 1,500 rather than 800. So it's significantly higher than what was presented, at least from what I have found. So that's why you're seeing your bills probably more realistic to the 1,200 to 1,500.
Right. That's another reason we're suspect of all the numbers. That's why we need to take another look at them. And I would hope that you citizens would get together, us citizens, and say, hey, let's hire somebody to come in, that this is a public city. You can have access to the records, take a look at it, see exactly where we are, what we can do, what works, what doesn't work. And if we need the rate increase, we'll need the rate increase.
So is that what I think that's a great idea. But when you say that us get together, like we get together and hire,
Get a committee of people who are concerned about power rates and hire an expert and come in and take a look at all of it, evaluate it.
I think that's a great idea, personally. Thank you.
Thanks, Lance.
Only if that
it
average.
says as long as you take your car to him to get fixed, he'll pick you up.
Only if that average calculates true for the city.
My name's Ben Scott, and I really appreciate what Truman and Staley and Segmiller's brought up here, and the feeling of the uncomfortness. I heard a lot of the unique way of figuring this out. I know it's going to sound strange, those things are kind of disheartening when you're coming and presenting some numbers to us as a city. And, you know, like you said, I would love to see an outside source come in and say, this is where we're at. This is how we got there. And then that's what we need to do. That's fine. I've looked into solar because of how my power bill is. I've never seen an $80 power bill. But Washington City is actually harder on solar than a lot of the other cities with our net metering policy. When you look back at that, it really makes you start wondering what's going on here. And I would really encourage that we do have you guys tables and look at some different options with that.
Jacob Whitney. So pleasure to be here. Thank you. I appreciate your reluctance to jump on this rate increase. I don't pretend to know the electric business. I don't pretend to know the city government, how everything works. I'm trying to be more informed and get there. I'm personally in the medical equipment industry, and a lot of the revenue we earn is through health insurance companies, and we're experiencing up to 30% cuts next year. And unfortunately, I don't get to tell them, well, our equipment expenses have gone up, so we need to increase it. It's backwards in that sense. And so, you know, I remember some years ago, I had an assignment from my bishop, and I didn't know how I was going to fulfill it. And I told him that, and he said, Jacob, that's a limitation of your mind. And to me, a rate increase on top of our already expensive rate is a limitation of our mind. We need to figure out where the high costs are coming from and do our due diligence in figuring out how to become more efficient, spend our money wisely. So I appreciate that suggestion, Ron. So, yeah.
Thanks, Jacob.
I know everybody's talked about how they appreciate the council and the mayor, but I want to give a appreciation to Kelly. I know at least 10 years ago, Kelly came in here and tried to buy power from the city council. They kept putting him off and kept putting him off. Pretty soon it got higher and higher, and then finally had to buy it. I know that he tries to find the cheapest powers to buy. Anyway, I know there's some people that told me they had $500 and $600 house payments. If you guys raise their, I don't know how they can afford it. I tell everybody everything goes up, but my wages, they keep going down.
You're right.
Anyway, it's just a lot of people out there I think are hurting for power.
Well, and just the increases are always scary. Whether it's a power rate or a water rate or anything, it's always takes some adjustment to get used to.
Anybody else? Going once, going twice.
Nothing else, Mayor, I'll make a motion to close the public hearing. Or actually, we need to open a
We
public
didn't have a
hearing.
vote, no.
Close it.
Thank you, though. I appreciate that.
It's got the mayor's hearing.
It's the mayor's hearing. So. I'm just.
Mayor, with what I think we've heard the citizenry say, and I think it's appropriate that I'll make the motion that we actually table our rate increase and look at it a little further and in depth. I think it's probably appropriate. I think citizens have been well spoken, and so I'll make the motion table.
I'll second that motion.
Have a motion and a second.
Rice and I.
Truman, aye.
Haley, aye. Sid Miller, aye.
Rick, aye.
All right, that has been tabled to a later date. Thank you, Mark, again. Okay, we'll move on. Item 11, resolutions. Consideration to approve a resolution adopting an amendment to the Water Management and Conservation Plan for Washington City. Michelle?
Thank you, Mayor Council. In 1999, the state passed a requirement for all water providers to develop a water conservation management plan. So in 99, we proceeded with that, and then every 5 years do an update on that plan. So we're at that point now where we're doing the update on the plan. I believe that all the council members received this, actually a hard copy of this plan. Some of the major things that we're addressing in this plan is that to work on our conservation, the education of the public, and we've kind of set up an education program, and we kind of do it in conjunction with our stormwater education that we're required. We actually go and visit the, I believe it's the second graders at the schools. We do the water fair that's done once a year in conjunction with the Conservancy District. And the other one is that trying to implement the water saving devices. The Conservancy District actually has the program. We just kind of piggyback with that to where you can actually change out toilets and different devices and get the water saving devices in there. And then part of this plan also is that rates, that we have our rate structure to try to encourage the conservation. So the higher you actually pay a higher rate for every 5,000 gallons that you go up. Washington, since 2000, we've actually achieved a 24% reduction in our water usage on the residential users. Currently, the city, our gallon per capita per day, we're at 281 gallons.
Per household?
Per household.
Okay.
With this, and in our plan, we are actually having to project out to 2065. So we're really pushing, the plan's really pushing out there, trying to achieve these reductions. It's really crucial for us to try to get some of this conservation to preserve the water for our future growth in the area. Even after we meet our projections, Washington will actually be higher than the state average for our gallons per capita per day. But that's kind of understanding. We live in a desert area, and northern Utah's a lot different water usage than that we are. And actually trying to get the northern Utah, where all the people from the state are, to understand that's been really difficult.
We're just talking about metered water, right?
Metered water, correct.
Does this discourage or encourage desert landscaping then?
It encourages desert landscaping, but really interesting kind of to go along with our last agenda item on power. One thing that they've really looked at is when you start doing the desert landscaping, removing the trees, that your ambient temperature starts rising.
So global warming happens.
And in turn, now your power usage is going to go up. So it's kind of a catch-22 on the conservation end as well. So with that, if you
one relates to this landscaping, we don't require that, correct?
We do
right
not.
Now it's from what I could tell and reading it, but we consider maybe encouraging it through education.
Correct. And a great example of that is the Coral Canyon area. They actually have a landscape design guidelines out there where they actually use a low water usage. And I don't have the numbers here, but their actual gallon per capita is quite a bit less than the rest of the overall city because of that. And they still have a beautiful landscaping there.
They also, I guess, just by nature, have quite small yards in comparison. So all of that adds into it. On page 3, section 2, and first 2 pages, one of them identifies the city of water rights, and then the other identifies city-owned water resources. It seems like there's some of our rights that we don't use. There's a variation between the rights and then the resources?
We actually do have an abundance of water rights that we own.
On resources, I don't see the Adair Spring on there anywhere. Does it get grouped into one of those other?
Yeah,
springs?
I'm sure it is grouped in there. I'm sure it's grouped into one of those.
You know, these spring names, I haven't heard most of them.
Yeah, we actually have quite a few springs and very small producers, but they're all, most of our springs are actually collected and they all, they're in close proximity to each other, so they come together. And most of these rights are actually, we've gone through and combined about a lot of our water rights together, and we've actually made our points of diversions, combine our rights and put our points of diversions at every one of those diversion spots. So our rights aren't specifically set for well number 2, well number 3. We can use them in any of the wells that we need to.
As the water district, I know they've approached other municipalities about the water rights that they own and their sources. Is the Washington County Water Conservancy District interest in our sources, or have they ever expressed any
Interest us in acquiring them?
Well,
or
I've seen
what?
them acquire some water sources. Tokerville's a good example. You know, they acquired the Tokerville Spring and in exchange provided some piped secondary water out of the secondary system that they manage. I just know that they're talking to some cities about their resources, and we have a fairly significant underground resource.
Yeah, and they really, and I think that the communities that they've worked with, those are cities that actually have not had enough resource, that they don't have the expertise to run those resources. So the Conservancy District has really stepped in and supplied all of the water to those smaller communities.
Part of some of those.
Yeah, and I think that when they refer to like some type of a Tokerville right, I don't think they're actually picking up their water rights because they purchased them from. There
And
must
what
be
they did,
something
they
that
made a
goes.
trade, and I think that was because
Yeah.
of quality of water. That Tokerville water is culinary
Yeah.
quality, and so they traded for secondary water, which they were using those as irrigation, culinary quality water for irrigation. So it only really made sense for the district to come in and say, hey, let's put that in the pipe to drink, and we'll give you something to put in the.
Yeah.
in the
It'd have to be a
orchard.
trade.
And I
It'd
believe
have to be-
that goes on down to Laverton and Hurricane. use that
Correct.
water as well as part of their water system.
But they'd have to trade it because they can't actually sell it. We can't actually.
Yeah, the
We
Constitution.
can't
doesn't
actually.
allow-
Yeah,
Yeah,
we can't sell our water rights. So they must have done
Yeah,
something.
they did a swap.
Yeah, that got around that.
Water
But,
district doesn't have to follow the Constitution.
but to answer your question, no,
Yeah, well-
they haven't approached us about acquiring our rights.
Put an
or-
asterisk.
I know at this
We'll put an
point,
asterisk by that.
because I'm on the board, they're not
Minutes.
interested in that.
I still like that we keep them as close to our best as we can. Mike, there's a couple of, I'll just say editing issues. One on page 14, the water conservation plan paragraph, you've got the word conservation that appears twice. Just thought I'd point that out. And then, well, he knows what he's talking about with water, and he probably didn't. Thought I had one other one here. Oh, yeah. A couple other points I just wanted to ask about. The additional conservation measures in section 7 on page 22. It goes down to 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019. It mentions implement phase 3 of the real water loss reduction action plan. Is that a plan that we already have in our possession?
No, it really isn't. And it's on the very top column there. It's just a continuation of that on down to your phase 1, 2, 3.
Okay,
It's
so
just- It's just
2016
continuing that. on down.
2016 will come up with that plan.
Yes.
And then this timeline suggests that in 2017, 18, 19, we start implementing phases.
Yes.
Okay.
And this, like this part here specifically, it's kind of a work in process on the plan is this area directly. It's something that we'll keep working on and work through.
What are our sources of water loss? This mentions water loss.
Water loss, we have system loss, and I think this year we were about, I think it was about 11%, just under 11% loss in our system, which is actually very good. We've had years where we're at 20% loss. Those are water breaks. Those are leaks that we don't know of. Those are theft of water. Those are firefighting. Other ones are getting the public on conserving, cutting down the water usage. One of our biggest issues we have that we need to work with the public is lawn watering. People overwater lawns, and I'm guilty of that as well. I mean, I put way too much water on my lawn, and we need to train the public on how much water your lawn really needs. And the district's a really good resource there. Julie at the Conservancy District, that's her job. She will go out and actually do an audit of you. She'll actually place these cups on your lawns and actually tell you how much your sprinklers are watering, how many inches of water you're putting on that lawn. That really helps a lot of people. The other issue is water saving devices in the houses, toilets, shower heads, those type of things. And, you know, the toilets, they've come a long way in the water saving toilets. That
You notice in here that we offer an incentive program, is what it's called, a rebate program. Does that exist for someone today?
it does. And that's actually offered by the Conservancy District.
Okay, so that's a citizen would talk with the Conservancy District for a rebate.
Yeah, they can actually contact us and we can follow through with them on that and work with them in the district on that. Sadly, there's not a lot of takers on that program, but maybe it's the word isn't getting
Yeah,
out.
I think that's exactly the problem, because St. George City actually did one internally, and they use their funds very rapidly on that. So I think it is a matter of putting the word out that, hey, this is an option. Usually people don't want to change it. When it breaks and they have to replace it, then they will look on a replacement to capture that, not to really go out and change it out today.
Yeah, and like I say, they're saving toilets. You know, when I built my house 12 years ago, those toilets, they really weren't a water saving toilet because you literally had to flush them twice.
3 times.
Yeah, 3 times,
I've heard that too.
depending on the load.
Factor.
I just put, yeah, here we back to pound.
That's right. It's a good joke. Thank
Yeah, I
you.
just put a new one in just real recently, and that thing it works great. And I think it's using even less water than the original toilet. So
I hope
design
that's
is.
a quote on the last minutes that Council Truman's in session. We have that in a minute.
I had one other question on page 24 where we discussed the mandated measures. I appreciate that we're not mandating much yet. As we have these developers come through with invariably, they're all going to desert escaping anyway. Probably because of water conservancy district, some of the ways that they're get back feeds. And also, I mean, if anything, a lot of the complaints we have about developers is that they show a picture with green grass and then produce one that has some desert rocks. And so I'm not sure. It seems like there's, whatever's been done, there's a pretty strong influence towards desert landscaping as it is.
Well, and a good way to look at that, since 2000, we've had a 24% decrease in our water usage overall. So there is conservation going on, and I do think it's partly landscaping practices. It's the water saving fixtures people are putting in their homes.
I can ask this, and maybe this is just a dream I had that was wishful thinking, and that is, at one point I thought there was some discussion saying that the more water the city acquires from the district, the lower price per gallon there is for the water.
Yes.
So it's almost like we're saving water, so we're paying more for the water. That doesn't make sense to me.
Well, what it is the, and it's the water treatment plant where we're all getting our water from out to Quail Creek. It's got its base cost, what we have to, you know, it costs this much no matter how much water we run. Once we hit this certain point, that water, we paid off of our base on it. And so now that water's a little cheaper as we go up.
So we have cheaper water, but the end user, when they use more water, they're paying more per gallon, even though we're getting it cheaper per gallon.
Yep.
It's a
Yeah.
diminished
Yep.
marginal
Yeah.
return for the cost, but we try to do an inverted rate to encourage conservation.
Wait till we pipe more water in and see how cheap that gets.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just doesn't make sense. Yeah, there we go, add it to the power.
Well, you know, and
Like it or not, that's how it was presented to us. It's not like we had a bidding war out there of somebody else providing water to us through treatment plant. That was the only seller in town. So we kind of took the same agreement that everybody else had. That's just the way it was.
yeah, we've just completed our big pipeline out here and our pump station. And my goal, and I'm going to sit down and I'm going to talk with the Conservancy District with Ron and work on rates. Because if we base load off of that treatment plant with that pump station and then we will peak with our wells. That works better for the treatment plant because now we're loading that plant heavier and we're saving cost on that. And then I can just and keep the wells on. So if I can get a reduced rate on that, we will probably try to go that direction, which in turns we get a lower rate on our water. The other thing that we did last year, year before, we have our own water treatment plant. And the city entered into a contract, a take-or-pay contract with the district on water out of Quail Creek, and that was even prior to my coming to work for the city. That water was very expensive, and we were paying more for raw water than we were paying for culinary water. And so I actually renegotiated that and got quite a substantial rate deduction on that to make it to where our water treatment plant is now a viable option for producing water for us.
Treatment plant treats Quail Creek water only.
Yes.
It can't treat our other sources.
We don't need to treat any of our other sources.
Ours comes out, that's the difference. Ours comes out, well, it's close to pure water to get around here.
And just, I know I've asked this for years, and I've always got the answer. Our rights and resources are sufficient for our citizens' demand.
No.
So if we ran all of our wells at capacity,
We-
we still need to buy water somewhere.
Correct, and that's what we're doing now. We're basically Washington Fields. We are running everything from the Virgin River south is running off of the Quail Lake treatment plant, and the wells and our treatment plant are providing the water north. And during our peak demand, we're just barely keeping up, and that's why we needed this pipeline with the growth that we're seeing now. We had to have that pipeline for this next summer peak coming up because we squeaked by last summer with our water. If we had a well, then we'd have probably some issues. We'd have to do an interconnect with St. George or Hurricane to supply water to us while that well was being repaired.
Yeah, probably part of the perception on water conservation problem we have is that we see still flood irrigation, and we see just gallons and hundreds of thousands of gallons of water being essentially wasted. And yet we're at home, we're saying you shut your taps off and don't flush your toilets. And at some point, is that water just unusable because of all the salts in it, or is there some way to change that and actually get it metered, or at least put it in pipes so it's not just flooding fields?
Well, flood irrigating is not a good way to irrigate if you're looking for conservation. It uses a lot of water.
And I'm saying that's that paradigm we have is, we're being told don't use your water, only water a certain amount, yet we still have flood irrigating going on.
Yeah, the issue with our water and flood irrigating in the fields area, Washington Fields areas, is that water is so high in TDS, which is total dissolved solids, and really high in salts. You can't really sprinkle with that water because the salts in there will get on the leaves of the plants and it'll actually suffocate the plants. So that you have to flood irrigate, so you're not getting on the plant, but you're also flood irrigating because you're washing those salts down.
Kills fruit trees.
It kills fruit trees, quite a few plants. And then
I've used that water to sprinkle my yard for 10, 12 years. Certain, if it hit the trees, your bottom leaves might die. They would still grow. It's not like
and certain plants will do just fine with that. We're actually working on doing some pressure irrigation out in the fields, and we're just very preliminary on that. And we've got Carl Larson with Stuckey Farms. They have 3 wells out there. And all of our new subdivisions put in a dry irrigation. So we're getting the infrastructure in the ground. Carl has come up and offered the wells to us and to get it into the system to where he can start using a secondary water out there. It benefits him with the Conservancy District's impact fee, but he has an excess and we can use that in other parts of the city. And we're looking at maybe blending that with some of the canal water to where we can even get a larger area out there in the fields and start getting them off the culinary for their outside water.
I'm just thinking, this is in Saratoga Springs up there. They don't have any water bill for watering their yards. It's all part of the secondary water. It's all pressurized. Everybody waters for free.
Utah County, they've got some amazing secondary water systems. They've got water pipes that are enormous. They're just their canal companies and irrigation systems.
Well, I come from northern Utah and I had Weber Basin water up there, secondary water. It cost me $12 a year for a 2-inch line with 120 pounds of pressure. And I watered anytime I wanted.
Yeah, that'd be ideal if we could figure out how to do that.
But that water,
It
better,
was-
that's better water though.
It was put in, I believe, in the 30s, the system, so.
So I know the water district has the Warner Basin Reservoir that you're looking at. The concept of that is, right now they pull the canal company water, water comes straight out of the river. And then the river is more highly salinated now because the water district was wise to pull all of their Lake Powell water out above the hot springs. And so as they pulled more water out above the hot springs, everything below the hot springs is becoming more salty. So the concept is the Warner Valley Reservoir would, instead of taking canal water straight from the river down, the canal would now start off in the reservoir, which would receive river water and even the high flow water in the springtime, which is less salty. That would result in a better water quality on the secondary system.
Yeah, the high flow water and also the reuse water.
The other thing is it would help with, the water. And some weeks your water's black, some weeks it's brown. When it comes straight off the river, it's literally straight off of whatever's coming down the canyon. I don't know when that.
You knew where the rain event hit by the color of the water.
I don't know when that reservoir's coming along, but I know I've been to the water district presentations where they plan to have a lot of secondary customers off of that reservoir as well, which I think would probably end up working in conjunction with us.
And I think what we've been doing is very wise on these new subdivisions, where we're putting that in there when it comes in, because I can think of the save on the culinary water, also using the secondary water to water our yards, it's a whole other issue.
Yeah, more than 50% goes towards outdoor use.
Yeah,
then.
so we would be saving a ton of water if we could figure out how to do that.
Well, at some point it'll be cheap. At some point, they expect the cost of that secondary water to meet up with, because right now it costs more to pipe it than it does for your culinary water, but at some point it's gonna meet.
Anytime somebody wants to use it, we're gonna have to figure out how to charge them for it and get more money.
Right.
Well, you look at the water district's plans, they're not, there's no secret about it. Their conservation measures are dollars away. They're gonna encourage conservation, but making sure that you can't afford anything else.
Well, we're really getting pushed from the state. The state really wants us to push our rates up just to force conservation.
Even though the cost of supplying that water doesn't
Doesn't
that rate.
justify this increased rate.
What is it, Mike? So we're like the second highest user of water, and yet we use, the cost of our water is amongst the lowest in the nation too.
Yeah, our water rates in northern Utah, we're quite a bit cheaper than most of these northern Utah communities on our water.
But I mean, nationally though also,
Yeah.
nationally, we charge much less, we use much more than almost any other state.
Page 25, Mike, one last little editing thing. The first paragraph there, the second sentence, responsibilities will include it. It just needs, will include. There's an ED on there that doesn't need to be there.
Thanks, Mike.
We need to approve this.
Yeah, there's a resolution on this.
Okay.
Mayor, I'll make the motion to approve the resolution adopting an amendment to the water management and conservation plan for Washington City. I almost brought power rates back. Apologize, everybody.
We should have gotten caught.
I'll second the motion.
Have a motion and a second.
Tyson, aye.
Sherman, aye.
Staley, aye. Segmuller, aye.
Turek, aye.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike. Item 12, a consideration to approve an interlocal cooperative agreement between Washington County and Washington City for joint and cooperative action for explosive devices response. Ooh.
Good evening. Thanks, Mayor and Council. This is similar to our drug task force MOU that we had, resolution, an agreement. Basically what this is doing, and it's a task force amongst the agencies in our county who all participate in a response team that responds to suspicious packages, those kinds of things that need to be taken care of and dismantled and determine whether or not they are explosive in nature. We haven't participated with a staff member on that team to this point, but we've received the benefit of the service. And we're to a point now where we want to support that with a staff member. It's not full-time, they train and so that's what this will allow us to do, is be part of that. Yeah, there's no cost. It's our resources. We actually do have funding set aside, not from our agency, but from grant sources that will provide the training that the individual needs to go through. So any additional expense specific to our department, but the resource will be available. They'll be part of the team and they'll respond and help other jurisdictions as well as our own when needed. So they won't be building them. They'll take them apart.
But Chief, this interlocal is just between us and the county though.
Yeah, and that's because
The agreement itself is, yeah.
that's because the county right now is the jurisdiction that oversees it.
Cost is essentially what we're already paying this officer or officers.
Right.
Yeah.
It's what we already have committed to and being employed with us.
Right. No additional cost.
And then the other just, I guess, burden is scheduling. Sadly, this is where the world seems to be going.
Yeah. And we have had, I mean, in the county, we've had calls to take care of these kinds of things. And so,
There's one just this week, Hurricane, one that-
yeah.
I don't know how it turned out.
How did it turn out, Lori?
Maury, did you get that? Did you figure out the resolution on that one?
Good answer.
Was it Terry Bond or? Pike Bond?
Well, Mayor, I'll make the motion that the council approve an interlocal cooperative agreement between Washington County and Washington City for joint and cooperative action for explosive device response.
Second.
I have a motion and a second.
Turek, aye.
Segmiller, aye.
Staley, aye.
Sherman, aye.
Nice night.
Thanks, Chief.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Anything to report from your committees?
This is the last meeting of the year.
This is it.
So I guess I don't have anything to report from my committees, but I do want to thank the city and everybody here for allowing me to serve over these last 4 years. It's been a pleasure to work with the city employees, city officers, and you, gentlemen, represent the city. So thanks for allowing me to be here. See you once in a while. And I mean, I'm going to publicly turn in my iPad so nobody can choose me. Walking away with it.
Well, we appreciate your service, Councilman Truman and Councilman Staley. To segue into that, I have something I'd like
I didn't realize it was our
to
last
present you.
meeting, so I'm still a little surprised. This is sad. I guess we saw.
Of course, Councilman Truman, you could always bring your iPad in the next time somebody tries to do a higher density in the fields, because we know you'll be here then anyway.
I've almost given up that battle. I lost that one over the last 4 years.
To the city, so that means you need to go golf or something.
So I can just walk into the golf course with that, tell them, bucket ball. I've got the key to the.
Oh, that's up to you.
Well, thank you, guys.
Give the last guy's a sword. It just didn't go over so well. We're getting better.
You mind checking this box before I leave?
That's right.
Well, I'll tell you how they check it.
It's
Lori.
interesting that you would say that because it does tick.
It does tick.
So again, gentlemen, thank you so much for your service. And we look forward to seeing you around town.
All right, I have a couple of things to report.
Okay.
And let me publicly say thank you to both of you for serving. It's been a great honor to serve with you. Certainly appreciate what you've done there. Two things. One, I actually started, there's a brand new, I shouldn't say group, Five County Association of Governments started a feasibility study on transit service between St. George and Springdale, between Zion National Park and St. George. I went over and attended the initial kick off with that, we are represented by Bronson Bundy from the city staff. It actually sits on the kind of board of directors of that representing our city. And so the whole thinking behind that is to look at the feasibility of running a transit service between St. George and Zion National Park and allowing those visitors to stay in St. George and get to the park and back and forth. So that'll be interesting to see what happens there over the next year. Also, just from the Flood Control Authority, we approved our budget for 2016. We run on the county's budget, which is January to December. And our new budget's a little over $7 million for the Flood Control Authority. Of that, $5 million is coming to Washington City. So we're getting a pretty good chunk of that out in our basins. Anyway, that's my report.
There's a mouthful of, thank you, Colleen, for, I'm going to entertain a motion to adjourn. And we do have some refreshments.
I'll make the motion to adjourn, Mayor.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second.
Nice night.
Terrific guy.
When Colleen brings these, you guys are really great.
We expect these now, you know.